think we're live. Let me just pull up. You try the coffee?
What? Tasted it.
Okay, I think we're live. Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to discuss, of course, the results of the 2024 election. And specifically, we'll both sum up the election, but also connect it to discuss the activist future for the U.S. people and working class. And then afterwards, we'll also discuss, connected to the election, is reading the involvement at these times. And so to begin our discussion, I'll hand it over to Doc to begin our discussion.
And thank you, Emily, and good morning to everybody. I feel that this is really an auspicious time for us. And really, as I thought about this for the last week, I said to myself, the free school is due congratulations. And because we stayed focused, we analyzed events properly and correctly, and you can say that. I'm going to, near the end of what I'm going to say today, talk about the so-called left, and et cetera, and whether they have a future. Probably they do. And I'll tell you why I think so. But really, I want to congratulate you all. A few groups of people could have done in the face of what we face, what the free school did. And it is, in a lot of ways, an ideological victory for us. And we stand on firm ground to go forward. I guess we have to say that the defeat of Kamala Harris on Tuesday was a crushing and historic defeat for the ruling class. Never in American history has such a defeat been delivered to the ruling elite of this country. Never. And even with the electoral victories of Franklin Roosevelt, which were probably the high watermark of elections and electoral victories, even the election of Lincoln in 1860, for reasons that I'll try to explain later. This is a historic and crushing defeat, and perhaps irreversible, which means that the nation has entered a new moment in its history, in its political and ideological history. This is difficult for people who are not in this country to assess or understand, and that's understandable. But most Americans don't fully understand it. But I'll talk more about that. But I'd like to start with an anecdote on the election evening at the home of Shantanu and Sambarto, which I'm so glad we could spend it together. And only four of us could last the whole evening. And that is Serafina, Sambarto, and Shantanu. Everybody else fell asleep and had to go home. But we stayed the course. And it was particularly memorable for me because I was sitting right next to Shantanu. And we stayed like that, locked together like Siamese twins for the whole evening, really. And we we watched as the returns came in on MSNBC and CNN, the main television networks of the ruling elite. We watched them come in, and we watched the commentators and the reporters uh, get more and more frantic, and their makeup began to go down their faces, and we saw them age overnight. And it was something to see. And that because Shantanu, we were just sitting there, and Shantanu was keeping up with the numbers more than I could, because he has a good mind for numbers. Man, I found this out a couple weeks ago. And so it started out with Trump 20 and Kamala 3. So I said, well, this is early. Vermont came in for Kamala, and I guess some other places for Trump. And then he was holding the lead. Yeah. So I'm saying to myself, well, California hasn't reported, New York, yada, yada, yada. And then Atlanta or Georgia hadn't reported. But Shantanu said, Doc, now he's up by 100, you know? He had 100, Kamala had 20. And so, you know, we're watching. So the whole southern tier or Sun Belt states came in, Texas and I guess Oklahoma and those states. And well, he was opening up a lead. And then Florida, and he maintained a lead. So I'm saying to myself, because I'm not going to, you know, start taking a victory lap too soon or celebrating too soon. Right. You know, so then Georgia hits. Oh, well, we don't know. And then bam, Georgia delivers for him big time. And then North Carolina, that fell. And then Virginia, she got that. Okay, she's making a comeback. That's what I'm not going to say too much, you know. I'm keeping, you know, myself chilled, as they say. But Shantanu's keeping up with the numbers. He's playing the numbers game. So then the commentators are saying, oh, listen, oh shit, this could be a disaster. What's going on? They couldn't explain it, you know? And then, and even when Trump is losing in states like Illinois and Virginia, it's not like he's getting blown away. So then you're thinking, well, damn, he might get a popular mandate, a popular majority. But anyway, so then New York hits, boom, Kamala. But still Trump is in there with her, you know? It's not like Biden, where Biden won New York by 25 points. It's kind of, she's winning it by 10 points. So he's still getting a lot of votes in deep blue states. So then the commentators start saying, well, now it's the 3 Rust Belt states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Okay. So it's beginning to look like something that I thought it would, a close race where Pennsylvania and ultimately Philadelphia would decide everything. So then the reports start coming in about Pennsylvania. It seemed like they started in the western part of the state, coming east. And now it is the thing, whoever wins Pennsylvania would probably win the Electoral College. It's okay. Shantanu and I are there, and some Barta, he's on the sofa somewhere. I couldn't see it. and Seraphina's laying on the floor. So we're looking, coming from the west of Pennsylvania, Erie, Pennsylvania, then Pittsburgh. And so it looks like in Erie, Kamala took Erie, that part up there, northeast, northwest. And then Pittsburgh, Kamala took that. So say the middle of the state, that's going to be Trump, you know what I'm saying? So then they moving east. And so the commentary and the worldview of the Harris campaign was that the collar counties, the suburban counties around Philadelphia, would save her. That white women with college degrees would save the whole thing. Well, you know, you're talking about laughing. That's a joke. But anyway, they're coming east and boom, Bucks County fell to Trump. So now they really, the only last hope is Philadelphia. And let's hope Black people turn out. This was the last hope. The Black vote that they didn't give a damn about for the last 4 years and, well, the last, I don't know, 100 years. Suddenly, the Black vote in Philadelphia will save us from fascism. So Mayor Sherelle Parker and the Democratic machine in Philadelphia had made all of these wild predictions. We are going to get 650,000 votes for Vice President Harris. And see, but then they had a interest in the Black misleadership class in the Democratic machine and the labor misleaders winning Pennsylvania, because that would elevate Kamala Harris beyond being the mayor of a failing city. Now she's a national player. She saved Kamala Harris and the nation from a Hitler-like regime, and authoritarianism and democracy would win on the shoulders of this first Black woman mayor of Philadelphia. You know, I mean, it's a beautiful story. You know what I'm saying? But it didn't come true. Dreams often don't come true. As it turns out, Black Philadelphia said, nah, we're not going to save this bullshit. Rather than 650,000 votes for Kamala, it was only 547,000. And literally, and we're not certain, the data is not yet in, 70,000 fewer Philadelphians voted than in 2020 for Biden. But more than that, Trump gained significantly in Philadelphia. We don't yet have the data precinct by precinct where you can kind of tell what was happening with Black voters who were the key. We could either save, quote, save democracy, and believe me, this is all quotes, or we could deliver it to the graveyard of history. And we chose to either not vote or to vote for Trump. Michelle, you titled that presentation I gave, Black Men at the Moral Center. Did I say that, or was that your?
That was us. Or I think you.
Yeah, well, whoever said, yeah. But anyway, this concept that a moral choice was made, that we would not save a failed party and a failed system. And we saw it happen in real time, looking at the national commentary on MSNBC and CNN. The outcome was decades in the making. We in the Free School have attempted to study deindustrialization, poverty, dislocation, housing segregation, the architecture and dimensions of the white supremacist social system and the system of resistance, the Black social system. We tried to make an assessment of the Black proletariat in Philadelphia. We kept our eyes on the prize because we had to know if the working class in general and the Black proletariat in particular had the capacity to confront the ruling elite of this country in the most consequential election, at least in 150 years, maybe ever, we'll have to see.
Mhm.
But we had already concluded that significant ideological and political processes within working people and the masses in general were occurring. In the year of Baldwin, we employed Baldwin to help us understand the people and the existential questions, even in a political context, that the people were dealing with. It was not just a matter of the system, it was a matter of the people and individual people, how they saw the world and existentially. You know, and I think to the credit of the free school, and this is why Baldwin was so valuable for us, and we try to make it valuable to everybody, to help people to read Baldwin the way we do. I think we've made some progress, but not enough. But when Baldwin talked about the fiction of whiteness, when Du Bois talked about the wage of whiteness, when Baldwin writes literally an autobiography of the civil rights movement, we could see ourselves as that civil rights activism in a new moment of crisis. Our vision became clear because our epistemology was new, creative, and fit the times. We saw the working people begin to take their rightful place in this society, liberating themselves from the ideological rubbish of postmodernism, identity politics, and doing it with a vengeance. Working people of all races were tired of being shitted upon by some snot noses who just got a PhD from some simple university telling them how bad they were, how racist they were, how misogynist they were, how homophobic they were, although a good part of the working class are already homosexual and some are transgender. So I guess they were self-hating queer people as opposed to the bourgeois liberal, you know, the whole joke scenario. And they delivered a blow so decisive that the ruling class is asking the question, can we rule? And don't get it twisted. That is on their minds every day. They're in psychological meltdown, and they are hysterical. I think Shantanu and Purva will talk about this. So we're at a beginning. I've already said something about Philadelphia. Once again, I think it would be accurate to say, and specifically Black men, and this is not misogyny. Well, first of all, to mention a man, in some circles it became a crime against women to even say, there's a man, or I'm a man, you know? The shaming and propaganda attack had been so severe that many, especially young men, had begun to feel that by being a man, they had done something wrong. They were wrong from birth. But that was a way of, of diminishing the working class at a time when without the working class, the nation would fall into a situation of decadence and generalized ruin. Without the working class. So if all working people and all working class men, especially Black men, are are um, are evil and must be put down and scolded and fingers pointed in their faces, even if they're poor and unemployed in prison, mentally ill, traumatized, you're still wrong. And anything that happens to you, you deserve. You know what I'm saying? This coming from some petty bourgeois, a professor of English at Harvard, please. So we talked about Black men in Philadelphia. If we know Black men anywhere, we know them in Philadelphia. And we have to know them better. Their experiences, their oppression, their hearts, because they are the target. Children, Black children, are the poorest. Second are Black men. And I've tried to say this. When you are poor from your 20s, let us say a decade, you are literally on a death march. You never get out of poverty, and you never rise out of deep poverty. It is a death march. And frankly, if you go around and you look at the faces of these men, you realize that they know that they're on a death march and that they will live short lives. They will be broken on the wheel of life. Society as a whole will turn against them, and elites will produce narratives defining them as savages and barbaric, needing to be locked up and controlled.
Right.
And they know it. They know it. On election day, upwards of 40% of them determined the outcome of Pennsylvania and hence the outcome of the election. Trump could not do this because most of them are either uncertain about Trump or don't agree with him. But they knew what they had to do in their own class and self-interest. If they didn't know Trump, they knew the Black misleadership class in this city. They knew their lying, they knew their perpetration. They know that on, like, for instance, the Black radio talk show, they can't call up and express an opinion without being put down. They can't go to certain churches and hold a conversation about politics or about their hearts without being put down, without being thrown out. They know that they don't have the proper clothing to wear to be respected in public. So they hide in corners. They know it. But they had one thing and they used it. They used it. And I am convinced that it was the same thing in Chicago and probably in Milwaukee because it's the same everywhere. Probably in the Bronx in New York. They behaved in similar ways because their conditions are so similar. But then, as we said in the documentary, and this is again, the documentary may define the free school as much as it does Baldwin. The dark and tragic landscape that is America. That what was happening in North Philly similarly was happening in Butler, Pennsylvania. And people in Butler, Pennsylvania don't have an idea what's going on in North Philly and vice versa. But the conditions are so similar that each group in different ways, and it's to be expected, Black folk do behave collectively differently than white folk. First of all, Black people are more collective to begin with. We'll talk about that a little more. But they knew each other even when they didn't know each other.
Right.
We stopped Kamala Harris, the genocidist administration, and saved humanity temporarily from a third world war. On a national level, Trump got about 72 million votes, Kamala Harris 66 million. She got 15 million fewer votes than Biden got. This is the result of a movement, and Trump's political brilliance, and he is politically brilliant, like or dislike, we'll get into that a little more, was to say when he made his announcement, which we latched onto like a pit bull onto raw meat. I guess that's the way you, or something. Hold onto somebody's leg or something. I don't know. I'm trying to wax poetic, but anyway. Okay. The idea of a movement. When he said this will be a movement. And it did become a movement, and it was not the Republican Party. The Republican Party had to join the Trump movement.
That's true.
Not the opposite way. So people say, oh, it didn't make any difference, Democrats or Republicans, they're both the same. Well, that you missed the whole thing. Right. You did what King said, you slept through a great revolution. And think you cute, you smart, but no, it was a move. And we even went so far, and it didn't pan out the way we hoped it would, which Jerry always reminds me of. No, but you were right when we talked about a triad of opposition. Trump, Robert Kennedy, and Cornel West. And Cornel West quickly abandoned the scene when he saw how high the stakes were, and it wouldn't be good for his health. And in that respect, you can't tell a man put your life in jeopardy just to run for president. So he played like he didn't know what he was doing, and then I understand the game. I would have done it. Well, I don't say that. You play crazy, and then you can't be found. I had a breakdown. But anyway, yeah. he abandoned the scene.
Right.
Robert Kennedy went independent and showed his behind. You know what I'm saying? And it was that period of uncertainty, but he ultimately joins Trump, which kind of, rather than a triad of opposition, we had a dire opposition and they merged, which was, I think, very, very important to widening the scope and range of Trump, because it gave people who would not look at Trump permission to see him and to vote for him. But this concept of a movement, and that was a brilliant and bold move on his part. He understood that he could not win as a Republican. He could win only as Donald Trump, heading a movement. And then when all of these legal cases and all of the talk that he was Hitler or like Hitler, an authoritarian, it did not shake his movement, because he did not have to get permission from the Republican Party. He didn't even participate in the debates. There were about 6 or 7 people running against him. He said, well, you all go ahead and debate. I'm already 10, 20 points ahead of all y'all anyway. So do your thing. And it was so, when you look back on it, he made strategic and tactical moves that were brilliant. And then, of course, Biden, and this was always a problem, had the lowest positive ratings of any president in the history of poll taking. Now, people say, well, if you go back to McKinley, President McKinley in 1885, but they didn't have polls back then. So let's say the 75-year history of polling a president. And Biden, even before the debate debacle, could not get his polls up. And so anyone with an ounce of sense said, they got to pull this guy. But the arrogance of the ruling elite, we got money, we got the means of propaganda, we can put makeup on this guy, we can push him out there, pull him back, and all that type of thing, and we can get him over the finish line.
Right.
But they got desperate and they overreached because they could not get his poll numbers up. And whether the polls are accurate or not accurate, the act of reporting them creates a political fact. So if you say, let's say the poll is not wrong, but if they keep coming up that Biden can't get over 38 or 39% approval of the American people, people keep hearing that, and his base begins to say, well, shoot, this guy can't win. So they did a Hail Mary pass. And they said, we're going to have an early debate in June with Trump. And their strategy, let Trump do Trump and let Biden just lay back. You know what I'm saying? And Trump will defeat himself or do damage to himself. And then the mainstream media will spin it. You know how they do, take one part, Biden say, I woke up this morning, and they say, oh, look how brilliant that brilliant statement that President Biden made. And I went to bed last night. Oh my God. So that's their spin. They spin. They're masters of spin. But Trump would talk trash as he does, and they would highlight that, look, he's an authoritarian. He sounded like Adolf Hitler, he's going to impose a dictatorship on them. You know how they. One thing I can say that they do, the ruling elite does know how to do, lie. And now they don't say they lied, they say they spend it. I spend it. You lied, but I spend. So at any rate, they had the debate in June, and they couldn't spin it. The man froze up. They said, well, his mental acuity was low. But that cat, that was more than mental acuity being low. When you freeze up, people ask you a question, like you see a cat do that. I don't mean to say do that. No. The famous Mr. Ross do that. I mean, when you see a person do that, different from do that, who was a famous writer. Right. You don't know. But you see, so he froze up. And so the man asked him a question and he didn't know where it was. No, really. Not only, I mean, if he could have just, said, yeah, something like that, they would have said, oh, wow, okay, thank you for that answer. Yeah. But if I ask you a question, yeah. Yeah, and it happened that way. And I'm not, I'm not making fun of early stages.
Late.
Late, okay. Oh, or late, he probably late now. But, and so at that point, the ruling elite panicked. The whole nation and the whole world saw what they saw, and they could not say any longer, oh, he's as sharp as a tack in private meetings. He's in control of every discussion of economics. He has the facts all in his mind, and he, you can spin, but when the lie became so apparent, so then they had to pull him. And so how do we get him out? Because he didn't want to leave.
Right.
And it would literally take a coup d'etat. So then he's going to defend his presidency and his candidacy by going to the black church. Okay. Things only got worse. So first he goes on WURD.
Right.
Do y'all remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then two black stations that hardly anybody listens to but black people. Well, anyway, we can get to that. But one in Milwaukee and one in Philadelphia. And then, the white media, they're not dumb people. The same question was asked in both places. And the same answer was given by Biden on both radio stations, separated by at least 12 hours. So then they got the woman, the interviewer from WURD. Right. So they asked her, would you come on CNN? Oh, she said, oh, wow, I'm going big time now, because, that's, going from WURD, from the hood to the white world, to the world, in fact. And the man asked her, it looks like, and this is a black cat, the question in Milwaukee was the same question here. Did they give you the questions to ask? And rather than her spinning the thing, she said, yeah, they gave it to me. Yeah. And everybody said, oh, man. Okay. Then, well, it's both painful and hilarious. Okay. Then Sarah had to fire a girlfriend on the spot.
Yeah,
she's fired. She's fired.
She wasn't doing anything.
But Sarah knows what's going on. In fact, she's done asked me to come on there now to talk about the election result. Huh?
Oh, she was fired.
No, I'm talking about the owner. She asked me to come on, but that's another. We'll talk about that in a minute. You know that people don't want me on there. But then Biden, in a state of where his mental acuity ain't up to par, I'm gonna go up in a black church now, because black people always gonna have welcoming arms and into a church with a bunch of fools in it.
Right.
He went up there, Mount Airy United Church of Christ. I think I've shown various of you that church. Okay. I'm black, as you know. I was embarrassed. That way them people acted. Oh my God. And the man came around and asked Biden, they passing the plate around. Biden didn't even know they gave him the offering plate. And so the preacher came up and went in his own pocketbook, gave him $20, said, put it in there. Yeah, go back and check the tapes out. So he going go around the media and everything. I'm going to the black church, and the black people down with me who can defeat me.
Right.
But he didn't know that most black people don't go to church no more. And in Philadelphia, over 50% of black men are acknowledged Muslims. So I mean, so that didn't mean nothing. And most people look at a church like that as a fraud and a perpetration of a fraud. So nobody, but anyway, but the handwriting was on the wall. So then, in the meantime, Trump goes up to Butler, Pennsylvania. And they set a cat up, gave him the ladder to get on the roof to assassinate Trump, because they knew at that point that Biden couldn't win. The only way he could win is if Trump was assassinated and they brought like Nikki Haley, or Liz Cheney, or, that would be the dream ticket for the ruling class. Oh, we have finally got a ticket of two women, one of color and one white. And now, oh God, this is the feminist dream. Can you imagine that? Nikki Haley and Liz Cheney running together? Yeah. That's as bad as in 2020, Buttigieg and Pocahontas. You remember that? Yeah, that was a proposal. Pocahontas. The machinations of the ruling. You got, yeah. So if they assassinated Trump, then all bets were off. You could do whatever you want, because you didn't want to defeat Biden. So you put Nikki Haley, a woman of Indian descent, and I say descent. No. Y'all don't know this history. You know when they asked her when she was running for governor of North Carolina, are you white? She said, you're damn right I'm white. What you think? She acknowledged herself as a white woman.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, but then for the sake of running for president, she would become a woman of color. Running along a cold-blooded white supremacist, Liz Cheney, out of a tradition of white supremacists and war makers. But that never came to pass because Trump, man, just and hit his ear.
Yeah.
He went down, came up and said, "Put my shoes on." That was his first thing. Told the FBI, "Where's my shoes at, man? You ain't going. At least I got to look good if I'm dead." Yeah, I'm not going down like that. And then he rose up, fight, and they compared it. You know that thing when the cat said Himo Jima somewhere after World War II, the American raising the American. So that conjured up that image in the minds of a lot of white Americans. Fight, continue to fight, even if I die. So that made him an overnight iconic figure. Not to mention when Fonnie Willis and them down in Atlanta booked him and took one of them jailhouse photos. You remember that? And then that became a bestseller on T-shirts. And a lot of black people said, "Oh man, he's down. He's under arrest." You know what I'm saying? So even when he was leaving Atlanta in the poor sections,
Uh-huh.
after they booked him and everything, there were black people along the sideline. Trump, Trump, Trump. So already you knew something was going on in the hood, not in the bourgeois sections. Now this is going to be, but I lost my train of thought.
All Sunday with a Grammy.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay. But I had to get into the deep minutia of this.
That was good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Keep some humor in it. But so then Nancy Pelosi and different other camps within the Democratic establishment said, we got to take this cat out of here, man. We couldn't kill Trump. This cat is mentally. Bye-bye. This cat is mentally thrown off. And so they said, so they began to jug with him. You know what I'm saying? And his family, his son, Hunter. It's very interesting, these white names. I've never heard a black person named Hunter. Have you? That's a white name. Hunter Biden, and everybody knows, he's on the pipe and other things. Even in fact, you heard in this whole scenario, they found vials of crack. No, powder in the West Wing.
Yeah.
Y'all heard about that. And then, when the election, they then tried to say, well, Kamala brought it in. that was her stash. But then other people say, well, Hunter, my son is there. Yeah. Then Hunter said, no, I don't do powder. I'm on the pipe. But no, only joking. But at any rate, Hunter Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, Doctor of Education, Doctor, and his sister and his brother. Now they all getting paid, by the way, for different, Ukraine and all of that. They told Joe, don't drop out, hang in there.
Right.
But then between the Clintons and Obama got in it with his little slick ass up, and the man had to withdraw. So then they say, well, who we gonna put up next? Should we have an open primary? Should we have an open convention? And they said, look at here. You don't want no open convention because there's too many factions. AOC and Bernie. And Bernie is out of control. You can't, and he's angry and he's got a lot of repressed resentment because the way they done treated him over the years, and they forced me to sell out and I didn't want to, but I did, and I had, all that kind of nickel and dime. That's when so you couldn't, so they said, then you get Jim Clyburn. I won't. This cat, the last sharecropper. See, when a cat be talking with all that, man, could you articulate what you've been on the national stage? Get your talk together. Let's put the black woman up there. Okay. So then they was forced by the Obama faction, and I guess we don't, because we can't have and then she had showed pretty good in short news clips to explain Biden's performance in the debates. They immediately put her on television. No, he just had an elderly moment, but he's really on point. And she showed herself very strong. At least that's the way the media put it. You know what I'm saying? So they said, well, damn, she showed herself strong for 6 minutes. She's qualified to be the.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. So they put her out there. They said, and really, I'm not joking, we will make her over. We will give her, as they ultimately did, at least $1.5 billion. She will mobilize the Black community, even though she's not Black, and she ain't from here, she's from Canada. Now, I'm not, yeah, okay, she's raised in Canada now. All that talk of her mother and father rolled her in the baby carriage on the civil rights. What civil rights march? They never tell you what civil rights march she was on. But anyway, it's a hell of a narrative. And see, she did what Obama could not do. If Obama was married to a white woman, he would not, because Black women would turn on him, which is a double standard, by the way. But she's married to a white man. Oh, but that's a beautiful, it's a fused family. His children came together with her, and isn't this a beautiful thing? And yada, yada, yada. And Doug, what's his name? Emhoff?
Doug Emhoff.
Emhoff. We bring him out, and they're lovely, all that shit, man. All right. But I digress. They thought they could do it. And they thought that we ain't gonna make the election on Biden lines. We're gonna make it a little bit on democracy, but it's going to be an election against Trump. We will turn the nation against Trump. And that's what they ran. And that was the mountain they stood upon, and that's the mountain they were defeated on. Because the masses of people did not see Trump the way they do. There was demonstrated a deep and profound epistemological difference between working people and the ruling elite. And based upon those different epistemologies, a different political calculus. And I want to come back to that because, in a sense, we saw the working people of this country ideologically united in ways that I don't think they've ever been. Question is, can it hold? Can it last? But there's ideological unity. It is interesting that in the wake of the defeat of Kamala Harris, the Democratic apologists, Democratic Party apologists and representatives have blamed the people, many of them. For instance, take Al Sharpton. Please, just parenthetically, he is not a civil rights leader. Let's get that straight. He is a hustler. He is not and never been no civil rights leader. You understand? I listen to MSNBC almost every morning. I recommend it, if you can stomach it. I've gotten used to it. But so Al Sharpton is one of the main people on there every day, dressed like a dandy, dressed like a hustler. Dig, man, ain't no civil rights leaders ever dressed like that. Man, why don't you tone it down a little bit? Then he's gonna have a Jerry curl and a process on. Man, come on, dog. You don't look the part. You look more like a player from the no, not from the Himalayas, but you look more like a player than a civil rights leader. But I am a civil right, and we in the National Action Network. And when I talked to James Brown, he told yes, and Mrs. Martin Luther King told me when I was 15. Always dropping names. Right. You understand? And then always with a threatening tone towards other Black people. If you see, because he, as a player and as a cat from the streets, he got that thug element in it. And that's what it is. And so, so he comes on there, they bring on 4 women from some 4 Black women. We receive threatening emails that told us, all that old, come on now. And so Al Sharpton, they brought the head of the NAA. The NAACP is a completely Zionist-controlled organization. It is not a civil rights organization. It is an apologist for the white supremacist social system, as is Al Sharpton. All of these, quote, Black leaders are in the pay of powerful financial and political interests in this country, just like most of the so-called left. They're bought and paid for. So they come on, oh, yes, in the wake of the defeat, the nation is still misogynist and racist. It's because the masses could not see what we were trying to tell them in the NAACP. Well, first of all, money, ain't nobody never heard of you.
Right.
We got all this power. Ain't nobody seen you. Where you from? See, if you say NAA, don't nobody know what that is. Yes, well, who's the head of the NAACP? What organization is that now? Never heard of it. Believe me. But they exist only for the visuals. See, the thing is to create a visual narrative. So you have to make it look like it's not just white folk, it's Black and white people. And Trump, he only got white people. That's part of the weakness. But look, we got Black apologists. So then they began to weave a narrative that Kamala, and this is what they said, was an excellent candidate. She did everything she could to win. Well, she wasn't such an excellent candidate. Why didn't you meet the press or go out? Everything was set up. She said, but the American people, especially the white working people, are backward and racist and misogynist and homophobic, and they don't go along with our postmodern narrative. They have to be dummies. That's what they came on there saying. But they had to tone it down because they didn't want to come too hard, because they saw that coming hard at the masses only made the masses come back at them. Okay, let me just, I know I'm taking too much time. But then they began, and this is in the New York Times, the opinion page. And there, if you read a newspaper, you should always make a differentiation between the news part and the opinion part. They're different editors and often different political lines. Financial Times and the New York Times, I can't afford the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post and all that, So I deal with two. The New York Times has printed some very important essays by highly intelligent people. And that doesn't mean you agree with them, but people who come close to looking at things where they are. David Brooks, I would recommend his piece. It's titled Something the Working Class Saying to the Ruling Elite, Do You See Me Now? And I think Ross Douthat had something, and others. And what they're saying, in effect, what we knew all the time for a long time, that the Democratic Party had abandoned the working people, that at some point this would explode in their faces. And it did this time. That you cannot blame the masses. This is David Brooks and others who are intelligent enough to look at the reality. We must blame the elites of the Democratic Party who took it down the path of identity politics, postmodernism, offended, and I guess this word I want, offended working people. If you are trans, that's your choice. But don't make that a part of the curriculum of my elementary school. You understand? I mean, I don't know, maybe this is exaggerated, but there are people said they were trying to bring a drag show into the elementary school. And then they were saying to young boys, 6 and 7 years old, you are toxic, you are poisonous, you are masculinist, and you must accept it now. And so they cancel children at early ages and then don't go to a college where you cannot express an opposing view. And even today, and this is, I think, at Lotus part of the problem, you are trying to bring them up out of what they have been socialized to believe, identity politics. It's going to be a long process. These universities have become ideological, and they attack the young people. They become enemies of young people. The Democratic Party is ultimately going to go into a circular firing squad. All sides will destroy each other. The question is, can they recover from this and be a party going into the future? The Republican Party, for the time being, is the Trump Party. We don't know what its future is. The masses of people have decided that that political and economic systems have to be changed. 15% of them, as we always say, have concluded that the old systems must be torn down and something new built up. Between 20 and 25% of them in different polls have said that they believe that armed struggles should be used to change the system. When David Brooks says that the ruling elite have abandoned the working class, I would say to him, too little, too late. That day is gone. The masses will not return to the Democratic Party. The left, or what calls itself the left. If they had any self-respect, which they don't, they would be deeply embarrassed at themselves for their behavior. They were the vanguard of attacking working and poor people. In the vanguard, think about it. Even while some of them tried to shift more to working people and to be less vitriolic in their attacks upon them, they still want to hold on to those elements of identity politics, queer theory, race identity, all of that, and think you can talk to the poor. They need to go the same way as the Democratic Party. They're parasites. We see them here in this city. We know how we have been targeted by them. And we know that they are financed by a bourgeois and ruling class philanthropic organizations, including organizations connected to, what's his name? Soros. We know that. And no attempt by them to present themselves as, oh, now we're reading Black Reconstruction. Well, I mean, come on, man. I mean, who you think you talking to? Don't insult. Look, if I were not in the church, I would be cursing. But to mislead working people Once all the work has been done to establish Baldwin as the principal theorist, now y'all gonna come along with the abolitionist school. And we reading Black Reconstruction for 3 weeks. Why don't you just say we're trying to read chapter 1 for 3 weeks? Then I could believe you. But it is a fake school, a imitation of something that lives and grows and is creative, called the Saturday Free School. And we should never, ever let them get away with the fraud that they're perpetrating. And we should always remind them, you're a fraud and you need to get away from the people. Get out of the way. We have no reason. They ain't doing us, somebody told me, you should be happy that they're happy about what? If they wanted to do something, come to the free school. Support the free school. No, there is no forgiveness for wrongdoing, especially when the stakes are so high. And the other thing, let's keep it 100. You out there on Baltimore Avenue, you don't know Philadelphia. You don't know Black Philadelphia. You don't know this poverty. You don't know what people are experiencing. So shut up. And y'all don't know how bad I'm going. You know where I'm at? Please come and get in my face. Because we got business to take care of. You understand? This is terrible. Terrible. Then, of course, the various communist groups, everybody's a communist now. I'm from back in the days when it was a Cold War, you go to jail, lose your job. Well, nobody a communist. Everybody was a socialist. I mean, workers this or workers that. Now everybody, but even the PSL. I mean, with the PSL, a communist party. Oh, really? I thought y'all was Trotskyites. But that's another question. Then you get the recently formed American Communist Party growing out of the Communist Party of the United States. And then, of course, you get the Party of Communists. And believe me, I have to consult Johan to keep up with all of this. He's the one he stays up late into the night. But does any of this advance the revolutionary process in the United States? I can tell you without any fear of being contradicted. No, 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 and no. They don't know what, experience is the best teacher. You can read about everything in a book and, look at documentaries and see the workers storming the Winter Palace in Petersburg in 19th all that. First of all, that was a cinematic recreation. It didn't go down like that, really. But okay, if you want to believe it, go ahead with it. Epistemologically and theoretically, they're so far out to lunch, it's a joke. And I would say that to them. To them, I would say it with some sense of empathy, because I know a few of them. And I do care about them a little bit. But you're going too far with this bullshit. You got to draw back. And then you look at their reading list. Okay, we all are interested in the theories of historic revolutions, the Chinese Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the body of Marxist work. I'm down with all that. Das Kapital. If you want, we could, I'm down. But hold it now. We're in a different epoch. A country that Marxist theory, even in its Leninist form, found difficult, if not impossible, to explain using the epistemic and theoretical frameworks. Very, very difficult using those frameworks to explain this. And hence, a kind of a paralysis, an inability, a hesitancy. And thus, I can tell you, a deep split, although not an antagonistic one, within the Communist Party over people who say, I'm a worker, a working class. But their imaginary worker was always white. Look at the American Communist Party. Look at their symbology. Everything is white. The future is white. I mean, white, white, white without apology. There ain't even a Mexican American, let alone somebody black up in there. It is white, or like as white as the driven snow, as they used to say. But come on, man, at this late date, and then their reading lists. The school, 4 lectures of Mao Zedong on philosophy. I'm saying beautiful thing, but not as a theoretical grounding for this. Because Mao was dealing with a social epistemology for that time in that place. You understand? For now, the fierce urgency of this moment, for this working class, for this people, at this time, you're just moving in a delusional way. You're moving further from the working people, further from the history of this country, further from the epistemic and theoretical frameworks for this nation at this time. Baldwin is 100 times more relevant for this nation than Mao. And that's not taking away from Mao and his 4 lectures on philosophy. Nothing. But to deny the revolutionary thinking coming from the Black proletariat is an act of white supremacy. Let's keep it real. Okay, I just want to end on this. The year of Baldwin is absolutely right for this time and this crisis, as has been demonstrated in the various conferences, in the various reading groups, in the whatever. We have learned so much, and we have attempted to share what we have learned as broadly as possible. And that's the key thing, to share what we know with people. And it will come slowly. In the year of Du Bois, sometimes it seemed that nobody was listening, or not enough people were listening. Sometimes it seems to be the same thing here, but people are listening. We have won allies, I think, significantly last week in Chicago, which was wonderful in every respect. The Howard Washington Library. And if you haven't seen it, it would be worth seeing. I think the greatest public construction in the last 50, 60 years. It is massive, it is beautiful, but it has his name, but not the content. But at any rate, May Jahan and Naya worked skillfully, and in spite of opposition, we were able to get a room. It was not large enough. Too many people had to be turned away. But those who were there understood. In fact, two women from Chicago said they will be coming to Philadelphia to attend the free school. And then, of course, student minister Ishmael Mohammed, and then our attendance at Mas Miriam, which was, I had the opportunity of sitting beside Eddie, who'd been there, and it was really an honor and a pleasure to sit beside you. Yeah, really, man. And Minister Ishmael asked me to come up, and just a small thing. I recounted to him what I'd said to him when we first met, that I wanted to meet him because I'd been reading his mother for years, Mother Tynetta, and I had been. And I told him that you speak like your mother writes, and he does. Cosmology, astronomy, math, and all of that. They, and I should have said, there's another called the spiritual sciences, esoteric sciences. Well, that's a whole nother field. But, and, it's so interesting. And I'll say this. This is why we're right to go to the Black community. Even when we're not understood, we're not treated badly. White people don't treat us as warmly as Black people do. White institutions don't treat us the same. We were, I'll tell you, Mas Miriam, and it used to be a synagogue, used to be an Eastern Orthodox church. And they have made it into something so beautiful. And they have a dome on just like a mosque. And those people love that place. It's over 30 years that they've had it. It's like it was brand new. They love it. And they welcome you into it. And we were welcomed. Come on in, brother. Come on in, sister. Sit here, I mean, we're not, think about this left. This is why they're so disgraceful. I tell them to their faces, bunch of bums, nothings, trying to be something. These are people committed to resistance, a high level of discipline. I don't know what people do in their individual lives, but in their mosques, in their public, they are unbelievably disciplined. And it was just so one Minister Ishmael Muhammad, one Nation of Islam, one Mas Miriam is worth more than the entire white left all put together. All y'all, put all y'all together and just one that. Because they are the future. If the future is to be won and fought for, there will be organizations like that. And they are at a qualitatively higher level. Now, of course, locally, you can't compare. That's the center. That is the center. And, one of the things, and I was so glad because, I always want y'all to see Black people at their best. I really do. Because it's easy to see us when we're not at our best because of the poverty, because of many things. But to see us like that, to see us like that, I was so proud. And I knew that in any fight, we would be alongside of them and they would be alongside of us. And a lot is a tribute to you all. You all are people who are easy to love. You know? The world finds you all so easy to fall in love with. You know, they don't quite understand all the time. How are Chinese people so interested in Baldwin? But they say, oh, but they are interested.
It means a lot.
They and this love that was expressed. And when Ishmael, you know, and he and I, it's so we only met each other twice. And it's like we're brothers, you know. It's so warm, and he's such a wonderful person. You know, a person can say all kinds of things, give great speeches, but when you're close to the person and you feel and you see how generous they are, how they laugh, how they smile, and he asked Johan and Magna to stand up and introduce them. This is Johan and his lovely wife. He called her Megan from India. You know? Yeah, so gracious. And this is the Saturday School for Philosophy and the Liberation Struggle. You remember that? And they want to preserve our luminaries. You know what I'm saying? And when I told them that we did a celebration of the 125th anniversaries of Paul Robeson and the Honorable Elijah, they were just so moved, so moved. So I say it is the Black proletariat, and it is that which is the foundation of the future. And we are a part of that future. And in the end, the free school is due congratulations. We stayed the course, we were right. It was bigger and deeper than we knew. It is the greatest crisis of the ruling elite of this country. We will have to think and rethink as we go forward. Talk some more.
Great. You want me to speak or? Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to, Doc was mentioning some of these articles in like New York Times and Financial Times. I've honestly been taking a very close look at how people are analyzing what happened because I mean, even I have to say I've been telling this to everybody. I was shook by what happened on election night because I guess we all expected Trump to win or expected Kamala Harris to be defeated, but the way in which it happened was unprecedented, and I think it requires working out what exactly happened, how people moved, and in general, the sense I'm getting from all the analysis articles coming out is that the ruling elite does not have the means to fully work out the significance of this. And I want to talk about, and by the way, this directly relates to something that we have been talking in free school in the year of Baldwin a lot. You know, what is going to be the forward movement of theory and knowledge and science, you know, which can help us understand what is happening in the world right now. Because in some ways, it has felt like this country is stuck in a past or is just plain stuck and does not know of a way to go forward. And somehow this election seems to have shaken that up, where for the first time now there's an opportunity for new beginnings, for new ways of thinking and moving forward. So I want to first talk about this article by Francis Fukuyama, which came out in the Financial Times, I don't know, yesterday or day before, yesterday maybe. I think it's called What Trump Had Unleashed or What Trump Has Unleashed and so on. And Francis Fukuyama is obviously, you know, the guy, the political thinker who at the end of, after the fall of the Soviet Union declares end of history with the, you know, the consolidation of the Western liberal establishment. So, I mean, I guess in that sense, his analysis is important. And I want to talk about what he says. So he begins in sort of a positive way where he's forced to admit, like Doc said, too little, too late, but he's forced to admit that
the election, more than, the policy outcomes that it might have, was in fact a defeat of the liberal consensus that had held for so long, post Cold War and so on and so forth. It was a defeat of the liberal consensus, and it proved that Trump was not an aberration who, the ruling class wishfully believed that, he's just temporary. He can be basically, dethroned and it'll all go back to normal. What was proven was, in fact, it was Biden's turn in 2020 that was the anomaly. And something had been set in motion by Trump's election in 2016 that was irreversible. It had brought in a new era of politics in this country. And the other admission he makes, which is significant, is he says that before the elections, Kamala Harris of the Democratic Party painting Trump as a fascist was wrong and misguided, because there was never a threat with Trump of becoming a totalitarian dictator. What was the threat was that under him, liberal institutions would show gradual decay. So he makes that clear that he does not agree with the fascist, characterization of Trump. But again, the question is, why so late? Like, why was this not something that you felt the need to clarify before? But, so far so good, right? But don't hold your breath. It just gets worse from this point on, because the rest of that article is essentially trying to make that case that classical liberalism, classical liberal values are still to be upheld in American society. It is the cornerstone of American democracy. And the only reason people were put off by it was because of the distortions that were sort of added on to the basic set of liberal values, which was neoliberalism with its emphasis on, the free market, but also an advocacy for fiscal austerity, weakening of the welfare state, weakening of the working class and the industrial base, shifting from Europe and America to Asia. And then the second distortion he points out is woke ideology, that whole identity politics movement, which basically displaced any real material concerns about the conditions of people into these abstract areas of, identity, feelings, and all of that. But then then he says that this is the reason why the working class was turned off from the liberal establishment, and even from the progressives who seem to care more about what was happening outside of America and what was happening to the climate more than they cared about actual people. And he says that Trump's win was mostly through the white working class vote, even though he sort of puts this as a footnote, and I want to return to this later, given what Doc also said, that, he also made some gains among the Latino and Black communities, right? But at the end of the day, his analysis is that same tired old accusation against the American people that, you do not realize what you have done. Maybe you thought electing Trump would be a defeat of neoliberalism and wokeness and so on. But by electing him, you've also eroded classical liberalism, which still needs to be the cornerstone of American democracy and American society. And what you don't realize is that Trump is going to obliterate it. How he's going to obliterate the same stuff, protectionism, tariffs, and he's going to weaken NATO, he's going to abandon Ukraine, he's going to abandon Taiwan, he's going to deport immigrants. So nothing new in that analysis, really. And what I got out of that article was that it's really his epistemology, which is that white epistemology, the white way of looking at the world and making sense of the world, that basically makes him incapable of really understanding what this moment means. So even though he is able to admit that this was a defeat of the liberal consensus, because his starting point is still that end of history with Western liberal democracy, he cannot imagine a future for this country which actually maybe does not depend on liberal values in that existential way. And for him, therefore, anything that threatens to uproot those root values is a step backwards, right? And another thing that struck me about this article was how nowhere in his analysis is there place for the question of war and peace, right? Like throughout the entire thing, he has no nowhere does he really talk about how much, the war in Ukraine, the economic burden that it put on American people, but then with the genocide in Gaza, also the moral burden it put on the American people, how much that actually went into deciding what happened on November 5th. He has no analysis. And in fact, when he's talking about Trump and NATO, it's almost as if he believes that war, NATO, the military industrial complex is a permanent fixture that goes hand in hand with liberal democracy. In fact, I wanted to read out a couple of sentences just to show what he's saying. Well, first of all, he says that this is the part where he accuses the working class of not really understanding what they're doing, right? So he says, it is also clear that the vast majority of working class voters simply did not care about the threat to the liberal order, both domestic and international, posed specifically by Trump. And then on the question of war and the NATO, this is what he has to say. There are no European champions that can take the place of America as the alliance's leader, NATO. So its future ability to stand up to Russia and China is in grave doubt under it. The other thing he says is Trump seems congenitally averse to the use of military power and is easily manipulated, but one exception may be the Middle East. So, in all of these things, what he's really saying is that without NATO, without this alliance, this military alliance, there is really there's really no path for American democracy to work out. But it's almost like he does not see the world. He does not see what's happening with BRICS. He does not see the ways in which the world, irrespective of America, is realigning itself with a mandate for peace, and peaceful development. And the other grave weakness of his article, of course, is how he dismisses the black vote as almost a footnote of the analysis of the election results. Like, oh, he peeled off some black voters along with, mostly Latino voters, And I want to come back to this point later on after I've talked about the other articles. But it is an important point, going back to what Doc was saying in the beginning. But the other set of articles that I want to talk about is by this guy, Ross Douthat, do that, who's a conservative columnist of the New York Times. And I actually found that his investigation of the defeat of liberalism is in some ways incomplete, but still more honest, and actually trying to make sense of what happened and what went wrong. Without, of course, like predicting what might happen in the future. And also these two articles that I'm going to talk about came before the election. So at that point, the expectation was still that this is going to be really close. So there was a chance that Kamala would be defeated, but it was not set in stone. Of course, all of that went out the door, on November 5th. But the first article that I want to talk about came out, I think, on November 3rd, which is titled, If the Choice in 2024 Were So Obvious, the election wouldn't be so close, And in this, he's basically saying that when Trump ran in 2016, the Hillary campaign, which was really the Democratic establishment, tried to make a bargain with the American people, where what they were saying was, okay, you might not agree with everything the liberal elites say or the values they hold, but voting for Hillary Clinton is the only way to safeguard three things: sanity, stability, and intelligence/competent governance, right? And Ross makes the claim that all three of these they failed to deliver. The first thing of sanity, that went out the door with, again, the woke identity politics movement, where liberal politics was taken to its like craziest manifestations. And he gives some examples which are very telling, like how, because of the transgender movement, gender realignment surgeries and medication became so normalized, had the complete backing of both the medical establishment, but also the Biden administration, when none of this had been proven, when its long-term effects, but also the psychological effects on really young people had not been sufficiently studied or cared about, and the catastrophic results that had. Or if you take like the Black Lives Matter movement and the Defund the Police campaign, the wave of homicides, crime, and violence that overtook streets because nobody could really say no or protest against these positions. There was no democratic debate. They were just decided, and you had either had to get in line or you would be cancelled. Right? This is the opposite of the sanity that they proposed. Like they were like, oh, Trump is irrational, he's a crazy person. Hillary is going to bring back order and sanity. But that was clearly exposed. The second thing of stability, and particularly international stability, that too had to be abandoned when people realized that, oh, it's not under Trump, but actually under Biden that we got pulled into this war in Ukraine. And then after that, with this horrific genocide and the Biden-Harris combos, like unashamed support for why it was Israel's right to do what it was doing, and the money and the weapons and everything that they sent, but also the perceived weakness of Biden when he would say, like, oh, yeah, we are working towards a ceasefire. It seemed like Netanyahu didn't give, two shits about what Biden had to say. So this whole idea that you needed the Democratic Party to uphold the rules-based international order also clearly did not pan out the way Democrats had packaged it, right? And then the third thing, and I really appreciated this point he makes because I've not heard it made often, is the promise of intelligence slash competent governance as opposed to like a Trump regime and so on. And no, like the Democrats saying that, oh, the Trump regime is crazy, they're incompetent, they just do whatever. But with us, you have like well-established, tried and tested politicians who can give you intelligent and competent governance. But I mean, Doc's introduction today sort of explains why nobody, even if they believed it in the past, can no longer believe it. First of all, the goof up, Biden goofing up the way he did, and then Kamala Harris basically being anointed, but nobody ever having voted for him, her never having been popular, people never having confidence in her, and then she not even making an attempt to separate herself from Biden's policies. And then Ross seems to really dislike Tim Walsh, and he says that the nail in the coffin for me was when Kamala chose Tim Walsh as her running mate. And let me see, this was interesting. I found this funny, so I want to say he calls that doubling down on mediocrity, which I really appreciate. And then he says, compare this to the people who are around Trump. And he seems to have a lot of respect for Elon Musk and JD Vance, which I don't share. I think Elon Musk, I've always felt is an opportunist, but you can't deny that he has clout as one of the great minds or scientific and technological minds of this time or whatever. You have him, you have JD Vance, who I guess is competent in some way in debates or whatever. But then you also have RFK Jr., you have Tulsi Gabbard, you have Tucker Carlson. And what Ross Douthat is claiming is, look, if you look at this coalition, it at least inspires confidence that these are a group of people around Trump who can think differently, who can do things differently, and don't seem to be as stagnated as like the Democratic. Now, I don't know how much I agree with this particular thing, but I do think he's hitting upon something when he points out the intellectual stagnation or exhaustion of the Democratic establishment, how they have no way and they don't care about understanding, explaining, and then finding solutions to the American crisis or to the world crisis. And I do think this is an important point to keep in mind, is that they are stuck and they have been stuck and they have, sort of adopted the approach that we are going to media campaign our way out of it. We are going to narrative campaign our way out of it. But that clearly did not work out because unlike what Fukuyama says, people are not stupid. This is the other and last essay that I want to draw from by Douthat, is one that's called Who Abandoned Liberalism First, the Populists or the Establishment? And here he's saying that if you want to really understand the arc that liberalism took, of course, there's that thing about wokeness and you can criticize that, but there's another dimension to understanding what really happened. And that involves looking at its organizational structure and the way it has evolved, right? So how from academia to NGOs to corporate HR departments to actual policies implemented by the Democratic Party, what they did was over time, they consolidated a common political ideological front, right? And and in this article, he's drawing upon essays by two other conservative thinkers, Siegel and I guess Minkowski. And he's basically trying to this is something that people have studied, and he's trying to outline the argument. And the argument is that after the Cold War, and especially with the Clinton administration, it was the liberal establishment, not even because of a populist push, but it was the liberal establishment that took this first step towards post-liberalism by basically violating one of the basic tenets of liberalism, which is that strict separation of the public and the private, the state and society, and so on. And there's actually a term for this, which I learned, which is this approach to liberal politics is apparently called the whole of society approach.
Oh, yeah.
Where the state can enlist NGOs, academic institutions, legal systems, but also civic organizations and individual citizens to act as watchdogs and enforcers of the policies and the ideologies of the state. And because you have all these non-governmental, civic organizational partners, you could circumvent the traditional limits that were imposed on state power by liberalism or liberal theory. And what this then allows you to do is to keep citizens in constant fear. They're being watched, that they cannot step out of line. Otherwise, they'll be financially, professionally destroyed, and maybe even worse. And so it was basically I think this whole theory is describing somewhat of, a surveillance state, but not with unconventional ways of it panning out. And I think during the and he brings this up, is that during the war on terror, this approach, this need for institutional coordination and surveillance could be justified away by saying that we need this to counter terrorist extremism and so on. But since then, it has basically become a tool in the ruling class arsenal to counter any perceived threats towards that ideological consensus, which in recent times has been mostly threats from the right-wing populist leaders and so on. And obviously, it reached a frenzy level with Trump, and it was deployed to basically defeat Trump and remove him from office. But the thing that I wanted to touch upon from this whole theory of whole of society, post-liberal politics, and so on, whatever name you want to call it, is this allows for democratic decisions made by the American people to be dismissed like it was nothing.
See, I think that's the. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you, but
Okay.
I want to say something about
See,
this.
Doc.
See, do that in this article is talking about two political theoretical explanations of the liberal state, liberal society. And one side from the conservative or side is the idea that the liberals, after 9/11, have deployed civil society, academia, the state, the government, churches into a united front upholding the liberal establishment and including the media, and that the conservatives feel that this is a threat to traditional liberalism's defense of the individual. You can go into the next theory, which is a more liberal explanation of the same thing, if you wish to. I just wanted to make, because it is, but
No, Doc, you say it, because I don't think
well, this article by Duvat is he's dealing with some complicated questions, and if they are, which is see, because the liberal establishment were delivered a profound defeat, and they know it, and they're and I agree with this conservative view of whole society. What they had established is a front, a united front based upon a common ideological framework. You know, that Trump is a fascist, that any threat to the existing liberal configuration of state power is a threat to democracy. But yeah, and so the conservatives see this conservative right, I forget his name, see this as a great threat to liberalism and to the rights of individuals. Now the other theorists, I kind of forget what he said, but maybe you can. But see, that's what the essay is about, you know, and it's worth reading. But it is dealing. In fact, I haven't had the time. I want to go to the writers themselves. But what he draws attention to is this ideological struggle of what liberalism becomes in the post 9/11, post Cold War period. You know what I'm saying? I think that's the major thing. And it fits into Fukuyama because Fukuyama's end of history and now Fukuyama eating crow, as it were. Well, history didn't end because liberalism is now under attack, not from communism, but from the American people. You know what I'm saying? And this is a deep conundrum. But let me shut up, man. You go ahead.
No, that's
Yeah.
good. There was a lot in this article that
Yeah.
needs to be unpacked. But yes, I don't know if I prefaced it by saying that this is really the conservatives trying to make sense of what happened to liberalism, and this is before the election, so it's not been defeated yet. But but they can perceive and they're realistic about the chances of it being
And
defeated.
the two sides, the side of liberalism, classical liberalism, or a university, law school liberalism, and the outside of the universities, conservatives, who are saying that this is not liberalism at all, that the liberal institutions have themselves undermined liberalism. And this is a debate which I think would intensify in this coming period.
Right. The next thing I was going to say is that just what Doc is also saying is that the conservatives basically say that this ideological consensus, which involves not just the state, but also civil society, academia, and all of that, makes it possible for you to basically even say the democratic outcome of an election is something that you can.
And even that an election is not as important as because we control this institutional framework. And hence the social geography. So you poor working class, poor stupid people can vote however you want for whoever you want, but we still have state and social power. And so you will, and I would suggest that we will see it deployed. The universities will become more aggressive. The Soros funded organizations, including the Soros funded left, will become, will become even more committed, because this front, this united front, will be deployed in society. I would suspect we're going to see huge demonstrations. The media will be the organizing center for them. Women's, our reproductive rights and trans rights, you can imagine all of the BS. And like Kamala said, we must continue to fight. Well, what fight you've been in to begin with? But, and so the Trump movement, the Trump voters will be under siege. That's it. That's
yes. And I mean, the other thing is that if you're within this ideological consensus as an individual, it doesn't even because you have this authority of this coalition. As an individual, you don't even you could not be able to justify why you believe in what you believe or why you think Trump is authoritarian, but you could still use the moral authority or whatever kind of authority this ideological consensus gives
Absolutely.
justify why your position is the right one and
Look.
you are the radical that
Look at these professors. Nobody knows them, but suddenly they're made celebrities. Ibram Kendi. I mean, it's so superficial as sociology is to be a laugh. But they know, and so they make him. They don't need him anymore. They'll bring someone else forward. But uh, in other words, Judith Butler can trump 100,000 working people. She has more power and more authority because of what Purba has described. And the university are a central location of this struggle. That's why, our conference was very valuable.
Right. And this is the last thing that I want to draw from the Dowford, analyses is that the thing that I was really struck by, and it's just surprising to me that I did not think about this before, is that the the Democratic Party obviously is invested in upholding classical liberalism.
No. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
But what I mean to say is that, say, if you look at the anti-Trump conservative movement, whatever that is, if that their criticisms of Trump actually sound so similar to what Fukuyama is saying about Trump's threat, is that you really understand that when you say the defeat of the liberal consensus, it is primarily the defeat of the democratic establishment. But then it also involves, people who would call themselves conservatives, but still go back to that white liberal root of
absolutely.
Yeah.
See, can I just say?
Go ahead.
Yeah. See, this is a very, very important question and really misunderstood. When they talk about classical liberalism, they're talking about going back to the roots of John Locke, John Stuart Mill. It does not necessarily include the quote social liberalism of a Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the New Deal. So the return to liberalism in the postmodern period is the individual as a queer person, a woman, a black person. You understand? So it is not social rights as much as individual rights.
Right.
So you get the Democrat, oh, we're liberal. What about the poor? No. We're about queer rights. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Does that make sense? So it is the individual rights, and these are the liberals, the Democratic Party. So if you think like, oh, they're liberals, they must be friends of the people. No, they're not. And these are individual rights for elites. Remember when we did Judith Butler? It is freedom from, not freedom to. So, So when the working people take their rights through struggle, then it becomes a threat to liberalism. Oh, we women are we queer, that type of thing. Because you see, but it is different than the John Locke, let us say, or John Stuart Mill, or that tradition. In that it is a reconceptualization of the individual, and hence the individual is an agent only of him or herself and for him or herself. I am acting only for myself, not for society. Does that make sense?
Can I ask something to
Okay,
clarify? Because I was thinking, so when you say that there's a distinction between the classical, how classical liberalism sees the individual, classical liberalism sees the individual as like an individual in itself and for itself. Is that what you are saying? Or I was thinking also because now, with the whole of society approach that you guys are talking about, that the individual is, on one hand, the individual is an agent of himself, for himself alone, but at the same time, like this framing of individual rights is something that upholds it's something that upholds the state. It's what
Well,
upholds.
this is very important. Oh, good, I'm sorry.
That's what I was going to talk about next. Is that
Oh, I'm
no,
sorry.
no. Because it would be good to have a discussion after that. I have some half formulated, half baked thoughts that I want to put on the table. Just from, so we've heard Fukuyama, we've heard Dao Third. I mean, Fukuyama, according to me, is more incomplete than Dao Third in some ways, but then they're all incomplete in other ways, And I think free school has a unique strength because we are rooted in the Black struggle and we are rooted in Baldwin and Du Bois and King, that allows us to actually take that question of what happened to liberalism or what was its contradictions to its to a logical conclusion, where this thing that Fukuyama is saying is that, oh, classical liberalism, good, all these distortions bad. So all we have to do is to take it back on track and everything will be good. I think this is delusional at this point because the thing that it does not face is also, I think, what Chambortu you were pointing to, is that it does not face that in order to reform liberalism, classical or whatever, you first have to contend with the fact that its roots are in whiteness or in white theory. And, this whole of society sort of analysis, I don't think goes far enough as far as what we have said with the white supremacist social system. Because even classical liberalism from its, and this, we've been talking about this forever, it's in the essay that Emily and I wrote in the freedom section, is that even classical liberalism, from the beginning, it had the contradiction of race, and its promises were never made to Black people. They could never benefit from the promises of individual right and equality and this and that. And I guess the question I would like to put on the table is it worth talking about a reforming of a system that was mired with these contradictions to begin with, without ever trying to see what this white supremacist social system is, and yeah, it's like institutional coalitions or whatever. And yes, there are liberal ideas that you're talking about, but you cannot forget that there are also white ideas. The rest of the world does not think in these ways. Black people don't think in these ways. Black people have always been outside of this. There was never, and they didn't want to be a part of this kind of a systemic, consolidation of liberal ideas because they could identify that it was white. And I feel like, what Fukuyama is calling distortions of classical liberalism, in some ways, I don't think could have been avoided because as times changed and people changed and history moved forward and the world was changing, I think because of these contradictions that were hard coded, you had to go to crazier and crazier forms in order to maintain that ideological consensus.
Can I just say, apropos Black people's relationship to liberal ideas, it's always been an uneasy relationship. For example, there was always this thing, and it's in King, you could see the progression of King's ideas from we will expand the framework of liberalism to include Black people, and therefore repair the flaws and contradictions in it until 4 or 5 years later, he's saying this cannot be saved.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So that even Frederick Douglass, what to the slave is your 4th of July, you've excluded, but we want to be included. So that was a but, and here's the catch. The Black misleadership class, the Black elite academic, have all signed on to this postmodern form of liberalism. Now, what it all means is frankly, I do not know because they're trying to formulate it too. But one thing is clear, quote, civil society, end quote, is the moment of engagement, the point of engagement. It is with civil society. And by civil society, they mean this whole gamut
Mhm.
of non-democratic institutions, so much so that the Democratic Party exists not to defend or protect the working class or the poor, but to uphold this architecture, this institutional, and hence the state does not protect the individual as in classical liberalism, but this framework of social control, of social existence. That's where I would see it. Now, let me go ahead.
Well, because question clarifying it. Well, this it's interesting because basically, like it was Raju who pointed this out to me because I like started my YouTube algorithm always feeds me those Jubilee debates about like 50 Democrats debate one conservative. The conservative is Charlie Kirk. And like I actually never knew Charlie Kirk, but Charlie Kirk to me is Raju pointed out, he was like, actually, funnily enough, it is Charlie Kirk, this young conservative. He's kind of like the face of the young conservative movement. He's the founder of Turning Point USA. He is a conservative, but Raju was like, isn't it funny that these conservatives are the most loyal to classical liberalism? This belief.
No, that's true. That's like why Trump had that. There's like the whole, it was like after, it was kind of the sequel to like Rage Against the War Machine. But they had this whole, the sequel to Rage Against the War Machine, but they had this rally this year that was like basically like defending Western liberalism, and it had like RFK Jr. and all these people. But I feel like it's the competing. I'm sorry.
No. Can I just just to be clear? See, classic liberalism is the foundation of conservatism.
Yeah.
So, the philosophy in its classic form could take on different forms.
Okay.
It could, but it was only with the New Deal that liberals became identified with a form of what they came to call redistributive justice. And what the quote conservatives, who are also liberals, are arguing is against a social framework. So a conservative can be a liberal. I mean, there is no difference. It's just the policy a position one takes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean.
No. I wanted to say that because, like, for me, there's so much underpinning what we understand as Republican Trump, Democrat, right? It's the philosophic underpinnings of it. Because I guess I never realized that conservative, like the space of conservatism, actually, basically what he's arguing is the Lockean ideal of like that man exists.
Burkean, but go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Burkean, I'm sorry, I'm
well,
sorry.
whatever the concept of basically whatever the concept of perfect freedom, like that man exists in perfect freedom in nature. And then like that whole idea that like basically perfect freedom is like man who exists in nature, but in order to avoid the state of war, you like give up some of your freedom to exist in civil society. Like that whole concept. Whereas someone like what you're saying about King and in Baldwin especially is the idea that I'm not interested in this, what is, I think, the liberal concept of freedom from society. But I believe that, like, this whole Baldwin it's what you said, Jeremiah, which is Baldwin always says, there's no such thing as, no one can give me my freedom. The state can't give me my freedom. Freedom has to be taken, as in, like, freedom must be struggled for. Like man must make himself man. Like let us as a people inject meaning into freedom once again. Like that is the King Baldwin concept of freedom, which is I'm not interested in what people understand as the American concept of freedom, like liberal freedom, liberal democracy. Let us as a people inject meaning into an incomplete understanding of freedom as a people, which is kind of where we are in right now. The American people are at a point where which is why the whole point of do that, and do that / Fukuyama, which is that this what may be an intensifying battle of over liberalism,
Mhm.
the Black freedom struggle
Right,
took the stance of, no, let us as a people re-inject meaning into what is the meaning of freedom, right? Like, rather than reforming liberalism or in the battle for liberalism, instead, which is also the trap, in my opinion, that Marxist-Leninists fall into too, which is that framework of individual rights, like property relations, mode production, like it's, but rather you get a new philosophy that comes from someone like Baldwin or King, which is the meaning of freedom cannot be given, freedom can only be taken through struggle. There's just something different, and
Absolutely.
yeah, I had some other points, but I can stop there if we want to talk
I
about
just have
liberalism.
one more thing to finish talking about, like, well, in this point, mainly I wanted to highlight this thing that I feel very strongly about, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that you cannot talk about the future of liberalism without dealing with its contradictions of whiteness.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't talk about reforming something when you have for 400 years refused to look at these contradictions in the face and tell yourself, okay, maybe it's time we need to work this shit out. So don't be talking about, oh, we'll go back to classical liberalism and it's all going to be
Right,
okay.
right.
This is a weakness. And the second thing I want to say is related. This is also why Fukuyama, Dowsett, whoever has no way of really understanding what the Black vote meant in this election
Yes.
and how Black people are moving. Because to them,
Yes.
like they don't see the white roots of liberalism, right? So when they're talking about liberalism, it
Yeah.
never comes up.
Yeah.
And it's easy for them to dismiss it as, like, it was just like a minor gain or this percentage, or that most Black people still voted for Kamala. And people are saying this, like these are in all of the articles, And I think they do this at their own peril because, yes, the white working class vote was important for Trump's win. Yes, the Latino vote was important for Trump's win, but it is not equivalent to the Black vote. It is not equivalent to the Black vote, and the Black vote is important for historical reasons that one must soberly analyze, And I think what I'm arguing, and this is what we have been arguing, is that the way Black people move at any point in the history of this country is a marker for where the country is moving.
Yeah, that's
And that needs to be said. And you have to refuse to get lost in the trap of numbers and statistics of, only like 2.7% here or this and that. But actually look at the fact that something moved. And, it made me think a lot about all of the studying that we've done in free school about, the Black struggle, and even in Black Reconstruction, where Du Bois says, the general strike, the slave removing its labor from the plantation master and transferring it to the Union Army wins the war, decides the war. And then what you were saying, Doc, about FDR, but I need your help to say what really needs to be said there. But the way I see it is that this move en masse of the Black vote from the Republican Party, which was the party of abolition, to the Democratic Party, had to do with the New Deal and the promise of bettering the condition of Black people who had not been given freedom even after emancipation, right? And actually, I would also like to throw in there the fact, and we've talked about this, how Henry Winston writes a strategy for a Black agenda, not a class agenda. And the thing that I've always gotten from this is that he's right that the principal struggle for transforming this country and even transforming, say, the capitalist mode of production or, the economic structure is the Black struggle. This is the principal line of struggle for what America needs to become, right? And I think this is the only way to see how people turned out for the elections this time, is that they're like, we've voted for you Democrats for year after year. We've not been given the benefits of the benefits of liberal democracy. We've not been given the freedom that we were promised. And in fact, what you're doing is you're killing Palestinians. And we've had enough, this far and no further, And I have to say, it's really moving, almost overwhelmingly so, that we are witnessing this in the year of Baldwin. Because we have spent a whole year trying to study the Black struggle trying to say that Baldwin is uniquely suited to speak to this moment because he is a Black man. He speaks from the Black proletariat. He speaks from that imaginary. And with him, we have a way of assessing the capacity of Black people to once again take up, the reins of the American Revolution. And, you'll have to see what happens, but something did happen, and it happened at the end of the year of Baldwin after we put all our heart and soul into precisely this, this evidence. We still have 4 months. No end to the year of Baldwin. It's a century of Baldwin. But it is overwhelming. But I think this also clarifies to me the role of free school and the rest of the year of Baldwin going forward is clearly the ruling class is not capable of understanding what this moment signifies. All these people who are writing articles, they can go this far, but no further. I did not mean to do that, but it really, Trump is right. He has been given a historic mandate by the American people.
Yeah.
What he does with it is unclear at
Yeah,
this point.
that's it.
We don't know what he's going to do, but it may well fall on us, maybe even this small group of people to really, figure out, work out theoretically and in practice the revolutionary edge of the ideological struggle as to, where should we go forward? Where do we go from here? Chaos and community. And anyway, I'll stop here because I'm too overwhelmed.
Can I respond to your presentation, also docs together? Well, I just wanted to underline those two. In some ways, there's a good combo of presentations together because even though, Doc, you said the numbers are not completely in, I do think there has been preliminary numbers that show that in urban centers, I think the most important statistic actually is the numbers coming out from urban centers from the election, which is there's an article that gave the examples of 3 cities, Philadelphia, New York, and Chicago, or Cook County, because technically it's by county. That shows that in Philly, compared to 2020, there's 50,000 less Democratic votes than 2020, which is significant. And you can guess, and that's, it's 50,000 less Democratic votes. We don't know exactly where it's coming from, but I think we in Facebook can say that does show something qualitatively about Black Philadelphia. And there was 8,000 votes gained for Trump since the 2020 election in Philadelphia. And it was a 5-point shift to Trump from 2020. And then in New York City, it was a 7-point shift from 2020. And then in Chicago, it was a 6-point shift towards Trump. And just to give a sense of scale, the 50,000 less Democratic votes is in a city that in 2024, in this most recent election for president, there was only 500,000 votes, 550,000 votes for Kamala and 142,000 votes for Trump. And so that's the scale we're working
20% for Trump.
Yeah, 20% for Trump. And so 50,000 less Democratic votes represents 1/10 of a vote, 1/10 of a vote for Kamala. And I want to say that because I do think, I think I said this even before the election, but one article is even noting the collar counties. The collar counties were actually qualitatively very stable. Yes, Bucks County by 0.47% went towards Trump for the first time ever, but the collar counties are qualitatively stable in terms of how they're voting. And actually, the qualitatively significant difference is how these urban centers taken for granted are in motion. And in particular, Philadelphia, Chicago, even New York City, you can say it's either Black votes or Black and brown votes that are removing themselves from the Democratic Party. That is qualitatively significant. And then the second thing I just want to say is that lots of articles have said this, but the 2024 election shows that like you said, Doc, that Obama is a spent political force, but specifically the Obama coalition, which has defined the Democratic Party. The only dynamic, in my mind, what people have considered the only dynamic part of the Democratic Party is completely defunct, which is like, you know, back in 2008 with Obama, the reason why people saw him as such this grassroots surge is because the whole idea was that Obama somehow mobilized these small, significant surges in the youth, progressives, and moderates, ironically, Latinos, Blacks, and people, and around the issue of healthcare, which is why Obamacare was such an important part of Obama's presidency. Kamala tried to do the same thing with Kamala Harris, except so much it didn't work out. Youth, like it's shown that in Gen Z voters, Gen Z males went towards Trump, Gen Z females went towards Harris. So you don't get the same effect like in Obama. Progressives abandoned Kamala Harris mainly because of the genocide question, and because they think Kamala's a cop. And then moderates also didn't like Kamala Harris. Latinos and Black voters, especially men, went towards Trump. And then Kamala Harris, like at the end of her run, tried to throw out a lot of her healthcare policies, saying that she would increase Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements for things like at-home care, like elderly care, things like that. Like she unveiled it on The View as a big part of her platform, along with the opportunity agenda for the economy, stuff like that. And in some ways, like the way Obama and Michelle Obama were mobilizing for Kamala showed that Kamala, who is actually more in the Clinton camp, was also trying to mobilize, something similar to an Obama coalition. And what it has shown is not that just that Kamala Harris failed, but our understanding of what is the Obama coalition and how it does not reinvigorate the people shows something about the change of the people. And I also think, I think what you said, Doc, where you were like, interestingly, it is the white work. What they don't see, they don't realize that they see each other yet, but that the white voter and Black voter across the country actually do see each other more than they think. That's what you said, right?
Without knowing each other, they know each other.
Without knowing each other, they know each other, and that is the role of the ideological struggle. Because I think there are two questions in my mind moving forward, which is one, the future of the parties. I don't think the Democratic Party has a future, actually. I think they would have to severely reorganize themselves, so much so that they would not be a Democratic Party anymore, to be a party. Which is also why I think Bernie released that very angry statement, which I found very disingenuous, where he was like, "You guys like failed me. I hitched my horse to your wagon, and this wagon like got stuck in the mud. What the hell?" And he's 89, right? He's 89, so he's donezo. His political career's donezo. And his all the Bernie crats and people who are associated with the Bernie movement, like AOC, are kind of donezo. And in some ways, I actually think the reorganization of the future of the political parties in this country will be between whatever party Trump represents, and then all those who oppose Trump. It will be a coalition of the Cheneys, the Republicans who don't like Trump, combined with the Democrats into whatever part. I don't think there's no future for the Democratic Party that exists, at least in my mind. And the reason why I say that too is because speaking from someone who's in the labor union, like in the mechanisms of the staffers, it's in shambles. The labor unions are in complete shambles. So much so that the local unions do not have respect for the international unions, are questioning the leadership of the international unions, questioning the leadership of the AFL-CIO. How can it be that a working class institution is so out of touch with the working class? How can it be, right?
Who pays their dues?
Who pays their dues? That is a question that is explicitly being raised in every single labor union right now. And that is an existential crisis, not just for the labor unions, but basically for that united front. The whole united front in the Democratic Party, which needs the united front to exist, all the non-governmental organizations. The second question, which is the future of the parties, is the future of the people, which is like the people who do not know each other. The people who, wait, what was it again?
They know each other without knowing.
They know each other without knowing each other. That I think what they're in search of is what we have identified as a moral center, which is in some ways I know it sounds weird for people to say moral center, but it's the existential center of both people's individual lives and how it manifests as the country itself, an unachieved country in of itself. And the reason why I think free school is so right is because it's exactly the task that Baldwin left us with, which is how to achieve the last white nation. That is that is the searching for the moral center that all American people deserve. Like that is real freedom, freedom from an entire worldview that has like that has led to a disaster decades in making, which has been confirmed by the 2024 election, that the ruling elite cannot rule. And so the question is, can the people achieve power? Can the people rule? And I think this thing of like in search of a moral center is also important because we in the free school over 13 years have played such an essential role in defining the moral center as King and as Baldwin, like defining the moral center as emerging from a Black freedom struggle, which is quintessentially American, quintessentially our inheritance. And that is a drumbeat that has to be amplified. And like we have done that in the year of Baldwin, and we have to keep doing it. And I just feel like being able to say it like that, that here we have a people in search of a moral center, like, like this thing that you've said, Doc, and then Ishmael repeated it, which is like the rejected stone. Like Ishmael was like the rejected stone, which is the Black proletariat, but the rejected stone, which also is, in fact, the proletariat in becoming, the American proletariat in becoming. That the rejected stone will be the foundation, will be the cornerstone of a new building, a new world house, a new home, like a new house. And Ishmael said something really beautiful. Like he built upon what you were talking about, the rejected stone at service, where he said, when the rejected stone is in motion, there's no stopping it. Like, like a rejected stone in motion. And I think that's what the 2024 election shows. It's the rejected stone in motion. And like has no bounds, has no bounds. Like a rejected stone in motion in the ideological battlefield, like striving for his or her future, like cannot be stopped. And that's why like what Purv was saying is so overwhelming, because it's like in some ways that you're kind of like, can this be? Because okay, my last point is just that something Doc also said like in Bandung reading group a few weeks ago was Du Bois talks about how important emancipation in American history was in forming the consciousness, Black consciousness, the consciousness of the Black proletariat, so much that the Black church went from multi-religion to Christian, because freedom became concrete. The concreteness of freedom, that Christianity, because the belief that like emancipation showed that freedom was concrete because emancipation happened, and now we have defined freedom as the destination of the freedom train, like that there is such thing as a train, a movement toward freedom, and we've identified that freedom is concrete, like is concrete, but we have to achieve it. And that time period of emancipation as so changing significantly the consciousness of the Black proletariat, the proletariat in becoming. And then Du Bois also identified the significance of the abolitionists and the freedmen, who are basically, to get that unit of the freedmen, the abolitionists, and helping form, like helping determine, like ideologically helping shape the consciousness of like basically the Black proletariat. And then, that's why you get this great Harlem Renaissance, like the formation of a self-consciousness, like double consciousness, the defining of double consciousness that is like a double consciousness, an American and Negro consciousness. That Doc said that in some ways you can see the unfolding, something similar happening now, which is before a great revolution, is like a very qualitative period where consciousness itself is almost like kickstarted, like makes leaps, where consciousness makes leaps. And that there is the role of not just the freedmen, the abolitionists, but we would say that is the role of the revolutionary theorist, the revolutionary intellectual, the revolutionary who is like taking his place on the ideological battlefield to help shape that leap, like kickstart that leap in consciousness. And I feel really passionate about this because like, I'm sure you guys are sick of me talking about my door knocking, and I'm not just saying it because I'm not just saying it because like, oh, I have to like suffer door knocking, so all of you guys have to share it with me. But like, I really was astounded when I like, especially was sent to like West and Southwest Philly. One conversation I had with Serafina with me, and then the other conversation Kathy was with me, where you don't just get 1, 2, 3, but you get multiple Black men all between the ages of 30 to 50, who are all like basically born of the counter-revolutionary civil rights movement, who all you get the sense that they're not defeated, but in fact they're reinvigorated in how much they want to fight for the future. That they know they have said no to the establishment, to the ruling class, and that you get the sense that they're ready to fight for the future if such a movement can be created.
Yeah.
And like, and that gave me it just gives you such great, not just validation of peace, but great hope that the American people are capable of achieving power, but that there has to be a leap. There's already a leap in consciousness itself, and that is the role of free school as being part of the grounding of revolutionary theory, like as the revolutionary, like whatever word you want to say, revolutionary intellectuals, revolutionary ideology. Like that is the role of revolutionary ideas, great ideas of Baldwin, like us speaking Baldwin in these times, reading Baldwin in these times, to help shape that leap in consciousness that like can be the difference between civil war and revolution. And so, yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Just, I guess even like with the election itself, I feel like many of us, but especially me, I feel like I had a lot of anxiety going into the election. And it's like, I was honestly anxious whether Trump would win or Kamala would win, to be honest.
So
I just had a lot of anxiety, I think, going into the election, and either outcome, like I didn't feel totally good about it, I think, prior to. And I think a lot of it was like, it's almost like you're heading into this like cloud of possibilities and uncertainty. And then now it's like, actually, yeah, like, I like the line that Serafina uses in her essay in the New Avant-Garde issue, but it's like, it feels like a morning after like a rain or something. And it's like, yeah, like things have solidified. Yeah, I think most of us basically wanted Kamala to lose, but it's but I think part of it was like, even for myself, it was like, yeah, like I almost like half believed a lot of like the experts and a lot of like the kind of commentators and punditry and all those people who were like, it's going to be like the closest election ever. But actually it turned out to be an electoral blowout, basically, with like Trump earning like 200 plus electoral votes and then earning the popular vote, which has never happened since Reagan, basically, for a Republican
since
candidate.
Bush, 2004.
No, Bush got popular vote? Okay. But still historic, and I think a lot of it, like I feel like in many ways we're probably going to be processing actually the election for like a good period of time. But I think for me, I guess, yeah, like that's one of the things where like I was just trying to think about, okay, like what are we actually learning from this election? And one of it is like, yeah, like specifically like the position, like the ideological legitimacy of like the kind of media, the punditry class, like all these commentators who obviously it's like in their interest to demonstrate that they quote unquote understand the electorate and the American people. But it's like, do they actually know the people? How did they get it so wrong? Basically leading up to the election. And I think the other thing actually that, I guess just adding to the conversation, but you know, one of the biggest kind of predictors of how people voted and how people will continue to vote is education level, and whether or not you have a college education or whether or not you have like a PhD or whatever. And it reminded me actually of, you know, Raj's presentation at our science symposium, where in many ways, perhaps what's maybe not, I don't know if it's the definitive kind of dynamic, but one of the kind of constituent dynamics of American society and American history right now is not even relationship to material means of production, but specifically a relationship to the ideological, like the means of ideological production. And essentially, which is also part of the reproduction of like social life and social systems and like people's social life worlds. Because I think I agree with that, and I really liked what you said in terms of like, there's like these, at this point in America, there's like these vastly divergent social epistemologies which exist in the country, which in some ways, like I also, like I don't think any of us fully have like access to all of it, but like even Emily, what you're saying, like, do I how you talk about like listening to people on public transit, you know, in your conversation with Garland Nixon, like what are people actually talking about aside from basically underneath this like whole apparatus of like the mainstream media and all of these institutions, but actually like what are the people thinking? Where are they also getting information from? I feel like that's like one of the huge questions which has emerged. Is like where do people actually get their information from? And this is part of like the kind of attempt by like the mainstream media to like, you know, be like, oh, like actually like we're able to be self-reflective and we're able to acknowledge our own mistakes, where a lot of like media people are basically like, yeah, like we acknowledge the fact that one thing that Trump has done is that he's built an entire media ecosystem, which exists basically completely separate from the kind of dominant mainstream media. And this is like, yeah, like my dad is an example of something like that, where it's like even like, yeah, people in like suburbs who otherwise have no real access to like social life, it's like they're still getting like information basically from, yeah, you know, like Trump directly or from like Breitbart or basically all these different these media outlets. And I think that that's part of it. But I think to like this, it also connects to what I was thinking about in terms of, you know, what makes the position of the Black proletariat in society decisive today is not even back during the days of emancipation, where obviously the position of Black people was both as like kind of their position in the kind of ideological and social life of the country, but also very concretely, like they were the foundation of the slave economy and of the plantation economy and of the slave system and the entire kind of apparatus of like industrial progress, which was built on the cotton kingdom and all that stuff that people always described. But that today, what makes Black people so decisive in the country is not necessarily their position in relation to like material, basically like material relations, but it's their ideological position in the American landscape and in American society, which is, I think, just confirming what you guys were saying. But the other thing I've been thinking about is Trump. Part of the reason why I feel like Trump defied all of these odds and also all the like polling, even with them trying to self-correct for polling mistakes for the past 8 years, basically going back to 2016, is that Trump is like genuinely like a generational historical figure, I think. And he's like, even if he may not be quote unquote a man of destiny, like actually I do think that actually maybe Trump thinks of himself as a man of destiny. Like I think that that's maybe part of his like psychological makeup. But even if he's not a man of destiny in the way that we've talked about, like I think he's a vessel for history, and he's a figure, a vessel for history, and he's a figure of a period of historical transition. And
historical what?
like a historical transition, like a transition between like almost political. Because I was listening to this interview that Ezra Klein of the New York Times did with the historian prior to the election, and it was basically kind of framing American history through these kind of like different epochs of political orders, in which you have kind of like basically the birth of the New Deal order, which obviously with FDR, and then essentially like then you get the civil rights movement, and then you get essentially the counter-revolution against both the New Deal order and the civil rights movement, with basically the birth of neoliberalism, and like Reagan, but really consolidated by Clinton. I think, and that kind of coincides with the attack on Black men with the crime bill. But basically, it's like instead of even just looking at it, it's like, oh, whichever party's in power, but actually like during the periods of like essentially the regime of a political order, there's a basic foundational consensus which allows even two parties to basically like appear like they disagree, but actually basically kind of carry on business as usual. And that Trump represents a break with essentially what, even going back to our earlier conversation, what has been called like the neoliberal order, also, which is also basically like the neoconservative order. And I think this was, like a defeat specifically of like neoliberal politics and the neoconservatives. I think it's what I think is like, no matter how you feel about Trump, that is a victory for the American people. And I know that people have like lots of criticisms about Trump in terms of like who he brings into his office and all that's like who he brings into the administration. But yeah, I think the other, I guess in that frame, I feel like part of what feels so different to me about this election is that it's almost like if Kamala Harris and Biden represent the status quo and they represent as historical figures that continuation of like a historical regime, like a period of political order, then Trump represents essentially this like zone of uncertainty or this zone of like chance almost of like the people don't know, like in some ways, Trump is at this point he's a very familiar figure, and like you kind of know what you get with him, but at the same time it's like you don't know. And this is part of what freaks out the ruling class so much, is that he's like quote unquote unpredictable. And I think the American people moving towards Trump is in some ways them saying we are willing to step forward into this kind of like zone of uncertainty in which actually the future is not decided. And actually there's much more on the table. And we're not going to accept essentially this kind of this return to like a status quo, return to basically like the old way of doing it. And I think that that's really important. And I think it's also clear like the American people, obviously like the economy, like when they do these polls of like, oh, what's your top priority in this election? Like a lot of people will say the economy, but it's like I feel like that's kind of a flawed methodology of polling, because it's like even if someone says like, oh, the economy is my top priority, like that's like an obvious thing, but it's like maybe your second priority is like, yeah, like World War III breaking out. But it's like that's never going to be captured by like that specific type of polling methodology. But I think it is true that the American people at this point are against war. And I think even if Trump himself is an imperfect and maybe people could say dishonest vessel sometimes for that like sentiment of the people, like what really matters, and like we said this, it's like what really matters is not even Trump himself, but the people and where the people move and what the people are thinking and what they're striving for. And I think the question today is like Emily was saying, it's like what really matters is what the American people are striving for in their vast majority, what they're struggling for, definitely exceeds, it has broken past the boundaries of like obviously the Democratic Party, but it probably also exceeds, I think, even Trump himself. And even Trump's own capabilities. And because I feel like, like similar to Emily, I feel like my main questions were like, okay, what will the ruling elite do? What will Trump and his camp do? What will kind of like the liberal, kind of comfortable, like PMC type people do? And then, like, what will the people do? Both the MAGA movement, but also this larger, what we call like the coalition of discontented, like over the past year. And I think, just wrapping up, like I was listening to this morning Nancy Pelosi's interview with New York Times, and it was crazy because she's like, it's like definitely, obviously, like some part of it is damage control. Like they need to, put on this like face of like actually like things aren't that bad. We could still win the House, all that stuff. Like we got it. Like actually, like this election wasn't that bad, and like all this stuff. And it's like Kamala was outperformed by all the kind of local candidates for House and Senate, whatever. But part of it too is like it's not just damage control, but there's like a genuine sense of like both denial at the heart of it. But it's like Nancy Pelosi, because like she's pressed by this New York Times interview, and it's interesting because it's like the most confrontational I feel like I've heard the New York Times being to like Nancy Pelosi or a Democratic official like her, where it's like essentially Nancy Pelosi admits without the working class, what is the Democratic Party? Is our party anything without the working class? And Nancy Pelosi saying that, oh, actually, no, we still do have a working class. Well, obviously, that's like not true. But it's like almost, the raison d'etre or whatever for the Democratic Party is even the belief that it exists for the interests of the working class. And it's like once that has been removed, it's like, what does party exist for? And I think, but on the other side, I do think that it's important. Like I think people should listen to like not just Trump, but also like people who are like in MAGA world. I guess like Tucker Carlson. Like I've been listening to like Tucker's interviews with like JD Vance, like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's probably going to be some part of the cabinet, if not just close to Trump. But I think what's really clear to me, at least listening to them, is that they're going to try to move as quickly as possible into this new administration. And part of that will be Trump and his people perceive their mandate as attacking the permanent state in Washington. And essentially this whole promise of draining the swamp. And they recognize basically that Trump was not prepared at all to do that, to do what he quote unquote claimed to do during his first term. And there's a lot of like actually very interesting discussions that people like Vivek Ramaswamy are like bringing of like basically Trump wants to like decentralize federal agencies. He's going to take all of these, like for instance, like the Department of Agriculture. They're going to remove it from Washington D.C. and move it to like these other parts of the country. They say that they want to basically destroy the Department of Education, which I think sounds kind of stupid. But it's also like the question of like, yeah, like most people in America literally don't know what these agencies do.
Yeah.
Like no one knows what they do. No one knows even how they use their money. And it's not to even be against like social services or the government providing social services, but it's like, yeah, like there should be an open discussion in America. Like what do these agencies even do? How are they using like tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars? And I think Trump is going to go after not just the top level positions of like the head of FBI, the head of CIA. He's going to go after, I think, the kind of like permanent bureaucracy class, the people who are kind of like the stable, what are seen as like the stable kind of machine of Washington D.C. And I think they're going to fight. And the question is like, what resistance can come from that? And I think, but the other question is, or I guess two big questions with Trump and his people is, what is the ideological framework for what they're doing? And I think overwhelmingly, what I feel like is clear is that Trump and his people, they style themselves and see themselves primarily through the framework of the First American Revolution and through 1776. And that's also why I feel like a lot of times it's like their rhetoric and almost like their philosophical underpinnings with like, yeah, like some part of classical liberalism, but also it's weird because I feel like when I listen to Trump people now, like Trump commentators, there's like some part of them which like sounds like FDR, like New Deal liberals or like New Deal leftists in some ways. Like they're always talking about like the common man, the working man, yeah, like all that stuff.
But isn't that Cass?
Yeah.
Or in Cass?
Yeah, or in Cass, those kinds of people, even like Megyn Kelly, like all of these commentators, and they're always talking. I don't know. It's weird to me because they sound like basically like classical leftists or like old school leftists in some ways. But I think that's a question of like what is our ideological frame of reference, and also this question of war. Will Trump go to war with Iran? Like basically, I think the FBI is trying to bait Trump into war with Iran right now by saying that Iran was trying to assassinate him. And like this other question of like Trump's ideological and financial ties to Zionists, like the AOC family, like who are the biggest, gave him like hundreds of millions of dollars for his campaign. Is he going to be ideologically captured by those forces? And is he basically going to be like coerced or even believe that he has to go to war with like Iran or any other country? I think that's a big question. And then I think, yeah, I agree with that. Like the biggest question is like, what will the people do? And I think that's a question which most commentators are missing because they want it to still be about Trump and all that. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to process for the election. A lot to
I just wanted to say a few things because I wanted to start with Penn, where I work, and I was actually very curious. What will I face when I go in on the morning of the 6th? And what will the reaction be? And the reaction was exactly how I had imagined it. There was silence. The entire department, a lot of people didn't come on the 6th. Actually, they stayed at home. Like an atmosphere of gloom and doom, hopelessness. And I received several emails and messages from my provost, head of my department, my advisor, saying that
Wow.
and
You didn't care about your mental health after
this is a very trying time for everyone, and we know that this casts doubt the future of science and freedom. But here are all the resources that you have as Penn students to avail. Seek help, seek counseling. If you want to talk to somebody over coffee, and just for them to just tell you it's going to be all right. Here are emails and phone numbers and resources. Like my advisor, who's people here know my advisor.
Yeah.
But my advisor said if you need to take some days off, take some days off, which he's never said in his life.
Oh, that's good.
Take days off. Take them off.
Yeah. But I think that what was really striking to me is that everybody at Penn, everybody almost expects you to be depressed about this result. And so I'm walking in there with a smile, and then I have to be like, yeah, I've shown this down. So I go and I talk to somebody in my lab and I say, how are you feeling about the election? And he said, it feels like I'm back in 2016.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And then I thought about that for a while and thought about where I was in 2016 when Trump was first elected. I was still back in India. It was November of 2016. And I had just started my applications to go to graduate school, which would start in fall of 2017. And when he won, I remember feeling that this would hurt my chances of getting through. If I do get through, I'm going to be persecuted. And this has essentially ruined the entire experience of me applying to go to the United States to get an education. And so this will be tainted by this man being the president for the next 4 years while I'm in the country. And what happened was I never felt anything in my entire 5 years of graduate, 5.5 years of graduate school. I got in fine. I had a very protected, I would say, atmosphere in the halls of UIUC. But you could still see that still see that there were remnants of the early 2016 students being traumatized, they can't do work. And I heard these stories where people have said, I can't work because I'm too traumatized because Trump is president. Elite students at an elite institution on their way to an elite life saying, oh, this and we've talked about this victimhood trope, about things that don't affect you at all. And I think years later, or where I am now, I can say that these woke students at universities are a kind of new elite. They are the new elite who have some certain cultural contradictions. But these cultural contradictions emerge from the same motivations that drove them to be woke in the first place. And I soon realized that the researchers and sociologists who also do work in wokeism and identity politics, they also consider themselves a part of this elite. And so you can't escape your own bias when writing about these things. And soon, I noticed that there is this trend where elites who identify themselves with these historically marginalized communities have changed certain definitions, and they've said that okay, the definition of success is the pursuit of their own self-interest, and that is what they define as a revolutionary act. And high-end consumption becomes self-care.
Yeah.
And you do it because you deserve it, or you've earned it, etc. And these elites who accumulate power in these communities are said to have achieved a kind of win for their community, whereas other people of the community languish in poverty and they don't have a voice. One person makes it to a high status, and then they're said that they represent the community. talking about, of course, Obama's and people like him. And then I noticed, and I'm getting to my kind of, but this is all sort of set up essentially. But I noticed that there are certain behaviors, if committed by a white man like Trump, it's considered rude and obnoxious and oppressive. But if the same thing happens, if the same thing is committed by like a person of color who's part of these elites, that is considered to be like, yes, good. Like you are getting some sort of reparations from the people and the country. And I think this is how, and this has been my experience through graduate school. And then, there was, of course, I got into the preschool and I learned about this. And I had so much initial resistance, I feel, to accept preschool ideas. And I don't really know why. In the same way, I didn't know why I was so attached to American liberalism. And I feel like there was a sense of a crisis that was put inside me which did not exist. And everybody, I think, has to kind of struggle against this because this is all pervasive. It's everywhere. I think that, and getting to like the essays, Fukuyama and Dowd's essays, I think one of the things that they mention, and I don't want to repeat anything that Purva said, which is very comprehensive. One of the things that they say, or I think it's in Dudat's essay, is that the whole of society politics, the whole of society post-liberal politics, is extremely difficult to sustain under except under unusual emergency situations.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And when I read that, I was like, okay, so that made me question, like, why has America, since the Cold War, been in this constant state of tension? Like you had the wars in the Middle East in the beginning of the 21st century. You had the war on terror post 9/11. You had the 2008 financial crisis, and then you had Trump and the rise of fascism. You had COVID, you had Hamas, anti-Semitism, and now you have Trump again. So I think this is kind of how whole of society post-liberalism has on very rocky stilts maintained itself because there's always some crisis that is pedestalized and said that you have to protect yourself from this, and this is where the protection offered from the state in exchange for the application of duty and responsibility comes in, which we have talked about. And this generation of crisis after crisis and made me think that, okay, the establishment clearly needs a crisis to rule effectively, and that makes the American state kind of incompatible with democracy. And yeah, I think that Fukuyama's essay really made me think because I was thinking, okay, he's kind of making sense about the rejection of liberalism, but then, as Purva mentioned, he goes like he has chosen his hill to die, and that is classical liberalism. He said that no, we have to move back into liberalism, and Donald Trump wants to take out neoliberalism and wokeism, but in the process drag down the classical liberalism itself. But the only thing I would want to say here is that I think Fukuyama fails to understand that people care about more than just the economy.
Care about
More than just the economy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And that decisions of morality affect actions, and morality is one of these aspects of the human condition, which is increasingly being affected by the concrete social reality of people. And Yeah.
What you're saying is, Emily was reading to me from Grace Boggs' book, precisely what you're saying. Maybe she could quote it. I'm sorry, I didn't know.
I just have one, like two other things to say. One is that I believe that this is a continuation of the previous point, which is that I think that people did not vote for Trump just because of the economy. The American people are war-weary. They distrust their government. They distrust the government adjacent institutions. They're afraid of constant surveillance, and they're disgusted by the deaths of thousands of people in Palestine and now Lebanon. And they're also very tired of living in poverty. So, there's this, I think, New York Times columnist called Nicholas Kristof, and I think he posed a question. I think this was before the elections, sometime in one of his articles, where he said that why put liberals in charge nationally when the places around the country where liberals have the greatest control are plagued by homelessness, crime, and dysfunction. And I think that there were very few, like this is the interesting part, where there were very few people who were closing in on this argument like before the election. But now after the election, there's a lot more people come out and said that, hey, the Democrats are at fault. But I do still think that there is a distinction to be made between the Democrats led to Trump's victory versus the people led to Trump's victory. And I think that I believe in the latter. The Democrats helped, surely, but the disillusionment that came with their with their rule over the last 4 years definitely contributed. But I think it is also at least what Trump represents, which is I'm going to take care of the deep state. I'm going to make sure these health agencies are run better, pull out of NATO, like have good relations, like have healthy economic competitive relationships with China and Russia instead of saying we're gonna bomb, So I feel like I agree with everyone when they say that the future of this country is exactly as bright or as dark as the future of Black people in this country, which is what Baldwin also talked about. But yeah, I don't want to repeat things that other people saying because I was also thinking about that. Oh, can I say one other thing? Which is that the question of abortion really actually is the last point that I'm going to make, which is when people went and voted, they also answered polls for would you support abortion care, and would you support abortion, and most states voted yes, like yes, we would want abortion rights and care and everything, 57 to 60%, even in states which you would expect them not to. But this voted for Trump over Kamala. And whereas Kamala's entire campaign was on the basis of these abortion rights and gender rights. So I think that really says something. I think that people know what they want, but they just don't trust you to do it. They don't trust the Democratic establishment. They don't trust them to do anything that they've said that they would do. Because when they held both the Senate and the House, they didn't do anything. And I think that this goes back into the maintenance of this post-liberal framework of control, where they need these talking points like abortion and education and immigration. All of these things, they need these talking points to sort of keep a kind of crisis alive so that they can still exert this kind of control to keep the structure in place.
Well, I think the crisis thing is interesting because I agree that basically like the whole of society depends on external crisis. But I feel like now arguably almost the internal crisis of the Democratic Party outstrips whatever external crisis they want. Because I think it was kind of interesting where I did, like, obviously, like, campus was not happy the day after, but I feel like compared to 2016, like, actually much
Yeah.
way.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of just like, like, this is
It's resignation.
like,
Yeah.
oh, like, this is not a fluke. Because I think in 2016, it was much more like panic of like, how could this happen? Like, we've been betrayed, something's gone horribly wrong. But I think in 2024, it is much more like, this was not a fluke. I think the people decisively chose Trump and the party like completely failed, like completely misread, completely lied, like fucked up like over and over and over again, like from Biden staying in the race to like choosing Kamala, not having an open primary, and even like not having an open primary basically for the last like 8 years. I think people have like actually are like, I can't delude myself anymore. Like I've deluded myself for 8 years. 8 years have gone down the drain. Like where am I? Who am I? It's been so long. Like we can't do this anymore.
We can't do the resistance liberal thing.
Yeah, people are tired of it. I feel like they've been like just like egged on and like psychologically manipulated for 8 years to continually respond to like this triggered like, oh, like Trump is fascism. And I feel like there comes a point where you're like, I can't resign. Like it doesn't make any sense. Because also like in the concession speech, like Kamala, all this time she was like, Trump is a danger to democracy. He's a fascist. And she's like, I'm just gonna peacefully like give the reins. Like,
Yeah, we're never.
She's like, you'll be all right. Like this is all okay. It's like, what do you mean? Like you've just been lying. And yeah, and I think like the people I talked to, like they were unhappy. Like obviously they would have preferred actually still Kamala winning, and I think people voted for her. But it was kind of like, well, if I voted for you, you still can't win. Like who's going to vote for you? And yeah, I was even listening to like Pod America, which is like the Obama staffer. Yeah. It was interesting because they're like, yeah, like we failed. We completely failed. The Democrats, like, what do we even have anymore? Like, if you talk to a single person on the ground, like, you would know that this wasn't going to work. And you can talk all you want about messaging or the fact, like, the idea that maybe she had good policy ideas that supposedly would have or should have benefited the working class. But you can't reach those people anymore. Like, you're done. Like, do you have anything left? And like, you're completely done. So, and no, you are. But I think it's, and like, I agree where and also I feel like I was kind of surprised by the lack of third party voting, where I feel like people like basically made a very conscious and intentional decision where they're like, I'm going for Trump. Like if I want to make my voice heard, like it's not third party, it's not a rejection of like the two-party system. I'm going in for Donald Trump. And come what may, like like I'm actually prepared to weather this uncertainty. Like I will vote for a repeal of an abortion ban or for protection for abortion. And I'm willing to struggle like on those fronts. But let me struggle actually under Trump. And not like I think that's very interesting. And I think the future of the Democratic Party, I think, is in like crisis because, like we had said, Obama, Clinton, like they're spent. The people don't actually want them. And there was a lot of criticism of like Bill Clinton going to Michigan and like basically defending like Israel and like calling it like Samaria and Judea. And the choice of the Harris campaign to lean so heavily on Liz Cheney. And I think, like that old guard Democratic Party that has defined, I think the last 8 to 20 years it's lost all like legitimacy. All legitimacy, all like it's almost like poison. Like nobody would want that ever. And I think my question is whether there is any future at all in the Democratic Party to find a new identity and to even make like a completely new identity, or whether all of the momentum and all of the activity is in like the Trump movement, with all of its like flaws or all of its like, open questions. Because I was like thinking about it where I was like, okay, like is the future of the Democratic Party like Josh Shapiro, like Gretchen Whitmer, like supposed like governance, where like, oh, like at least you are making the state maybe more functional. And I don't know if that's enough. And obviously like AOC also done a lot of their legitimacy by continually supporting these campaigns and going all over. But then at the same time, I think ideologically, there's a lot of interesting and like kind of I don't feel really comfortable with all the stuff going on in like the Trump MAGA like idea landscape. But I think in the podcast that interesting thing was like, okay, they want to, if the Trump administration wants to get rid of like a lot of the government agencies and the mid-level like federal employees and the bureaucrats, they will not be able to do that if they end up in war with Iran. And so I think it's like, it's kind of an interesting conundrum. Like, you actually want to achieve, you say that you're going to, yeah, it was Tucker who brought that.
Yeah, well, Tucker was like, the only thing that would prevent Trump from actually taking out the thousands of federal employees who make up the deep state is if the deep state is able to succeed in starting a war with Iran. Because Tucker's like, yeah, actually, what created even like the whole deep state as we know it was the like the warfare state. And it's like basically like how do you even explain the Pentagon without, and then this also goes to the whole crisis thing. Like they need, it's like war creates the need for like this vast state apparatus.
Yeah, I think in Lenin's Imperialism, he says that war is the capitalist country's way of exploiting its internal contradictions. Like it doesn't have access to markets, so it expands markets outside. But I also wanted to agree with the difference between the 2016 election and the 2024 election was you can't argue. This isn't who we are. Yes, it absolutely is. This is who we are.
This is what,
This is who we are.
yeah.
Donald Trump is our president. You know, it's the working people. Do you see me now? You know, do I have to speak up?
It's not like in 2016, I feel like you could claim ignorance and say like, oh, I didn't know that Americans were like so racist. So I feel like in 2024, if you're going to continually default to that position, that is the defining feature and that's all there is in the American people, like you have no interest in democracy, you have no interest in the people, and you have no interest in knowing them or understanding them. And I feel like actually that's one of the great strengths of like the Trump movement, which is actually like at least some like semblance of curiosity in the American people and the idea that they have political depth or political capacity.
Yeah.
Wait, can I also add to that? Because I agree with what Nouri, like more than like maybe what you faced in your department. I was also surprised by how much more measured this response seems to be. And yeah, among the professors, you know, of course, they are the ones who are talking the biggest right now. But among young people, and we cannot forget this is also because there was a movement in spring. And yes, some young people slept through it and didn't think they had to have anything to do with it. But it's changed the consciousness of students and, you know, grad students and all of them. And while they might not like Trump, it's hard, it's understandable, you know. They understand or are more measured about the defeat of the Democratic Party having been for a just reason. You know, it's because a movement happened and it can't be forgotten. That's all I wanted to say.
I think I don't mean to say that my department does think, yes, all the professors, like you said, are the ones who are talking the most and who are actually trying to sort of tell the students that
You should feel bad.
You should be feeling more bad about this, right? But amongst the students, I do see a more defeated, gloomy nature than the angry. You know, we have to do something about this. This is going to erode our democracy, kind of a feeling. But then you know there are also so many New York Times articles have come out since November 5th who are putting the blame on certain sections of the people and the community, like for the Arab voters, the Black voters, the Latino voters, they're all at fault. Or in totality, the American people are dumb, racist, sexist people.
But the argument that a lot of I feel like media people make, or like the ones who are the most delusional, is that the American people actually want authoritarianism. That's the argument, which is that the most decisive democratic mandate that has been yet delivered, basically in the 21st century, is actually a sign that Americans don't want democracy. They want authoritarianism. And it's like, I feel like the kind of the tension or the vacillation amongst a lot of like who would otherwise be the kind of like resistance liberals who could be counted on to kind of like show up to defend the Democratic Party with like, if you remember like the pink feminism hats of like 2016 and stuff, and like all those people, it's like some people either it's like we recognize, okay, actually, yeah, the American people, it's like there's nothing I can do. The American people are racist, like they are backwards, and I can't do anything about it. Or it's like, but the flip side is that I think a lot of people, it's like, why the fuck should I fight to defend this Democratic Party? Like, I just feel like that's part of the kind of unspoken, like, air of both. It's not even like both defeat, but also kind of like it's like almost like, yeah, Trump is bad. Like, I don't really care about the Democrats to basically go to war.
Right.
And I think the question is like, can the Democrats basically regroup
Right.
and mobilize? Because it was like in the interview that Nancy Pelosi did, she's like, okay, what is democracy? She said it's like free and fair elections, peaceful transfer of power, independence of the judiciary, rule of law. It's like all those things are democracy. It's like nowhere in there is like this concept of like the rule of the people. And so it's like, okay, if that's what the Democrats perceive as like quote unquote democracy, our democracy, which
Right.
Trump is going to threaten, it's like who the fuck is going to actually like mobilize in like hundreds of thousands of numbers to defend like like the peaceful the independence of the judiciary. It's like
Yeah.
no one's going to. And I
I'm
think that's
voting
that's
on the
the
independence of the judiciary. I'm sorry.
Right.
Just,
Go ahead, man.
just to complete my thought, when liberals are in tears or histrionics, I don't have sympathy because anymore. I have sympathy as in, oh yeah, I was there. Not everyone comes out of the room, a red flag communist like you got, but
I don't understand what you say. That one more time.
No, I won't say it again. No, I won't say it again. No, I mean, I used to have sympathy for liberals, but now I don't have sympathy for the histrionics because if you look at Biden's policy, what are the policy differences? Like, what is going to happen? Like, oh, he's going to choose the Supreme Court, like it says in the Constitution. That's fascism. Or, what did Biden do with immigration reform? Like, he kept the Trump policies. Like, what did he do with the war on China and all these tariffs? Biden's policy was Trump. Yeah, he escalated. What is Trump going to do? Use all these executive orders that Obama made, popular? Wasn't that Obama's route? Oh, I can't do anything with the Senate. But, more likely it's just going to be political deadlock and, Trump being shut down and, 4 more years of quote unquote resistance, but less mustard. But also, there's the saying, when you scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds. And there have been people online or in person. Oh, all these Arabs and Muslims, they voted for Trump because of Palestine. Well, good. I hope all those Palestinians die. Like, okay. Or all these Latinos, they voted for Trump because whatever reason. I don't care if they're poor. I hope they get deported. Like, you can't say that. Not every Latino is an illegal immigrant. That's racist.
The ones that voted are not illegal.
Yeah, the ones that can't vote. You can't vote and be illegal. I thought you said that didn't happen. But, so that's what I mean when I say Trump is who we are. Is those were the policies. Those milquetoast policies are what Biden had. It's a continuous line, and it's not like what is this? Trump is going to overturn the government. We're going to have January 6th, and the bear costume guy is going to come, out of jail or be in the cabinet or something. And then, also I was disappointed, about the Green Party and their low turnout. I wasn't surprised because I voted for the Green Party in 2016, and I was disappointed by them in 2016. And I said, okay, I tried that once. Let's not do that again. So this time I voted for someone with a J for a middle name. But I was disappointed by.
Crazy.
I was disappointed by Garland Nixon when he said, "Oh, well, what do you think about all these Arabs and Muslims and whatever, blah blah blah." Like, who cares? Arabs are like nothing of America. They're not even that big as a world historic. As a world people. There's like 300,000 of them. They don't have enough water to produce a population like China or India. We talked about I love geology or geography. Geography matters when it comes to forming a people. But the main point I want to make to get back on track.
Please.
The main point I want to make is Arab people historically in 2000 voted for George Bush because they were considered white in the census and because they were small business owners. So that flip of Arab Americans voting for Republicans, not a surprise at all. What is a surprise is African Americans voting for Donald Trump. And I think that we talked a lot, and a lot of people said, oh, the working class men and Democrats, okay, that's not news anymore. What's the news? What can we gather from this? African Americans have abandoned the Democratic Party. That's not a 20-year flip. That's a 150-year flip.
Yes. Wait, can I? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this question about liberalism and how it's sort of cracking is very significant. I think part of the reason I think a lot of people on that side of the political spectrum are having such a difficult time is because their political thinking is still frozen in time.
Yeah.
The reason I think that liberalism has become so successful and so popular is because it's been able to basically co-opt the civil rights movement. It was a Democratic administration decided to sign the Civil Rights Bill, and all of the sort of identity politics that have flown out have sort of tried to couch themselves or advertise themselves as an extension of the individual rights, which is supposedly what we're supposed to believe the civil rights movement was about. So what I'm saying is that liberalism had captured sort of the moral authority of the population because it was associated with Martin Luther King. In that moral authority, what the liberal establishment has been able to do is basically have a comfortable conversation because that frozen time idea, that history, really keeps the conversation away from a systemic view of society, more identitarian individual view of society. Now it's starting to crack sort of the rejection of that, the bow that's breaking from that cradle of a comfortable conversation about individualism is, if Donald Trump says anything else, all we're being told is he's the face of all evil and anti-liberal. And if people are saying, well, we'll go with that, we've lost the moral authority, we've lost the story and the plot. It's also interesting that part of that conversation has been predicated on we got the rights for African Americans, we're gonna get the rights for the gays, and we're gonna get rights for trans, and on and on and on. We're gonna build this broad coalition, right? Well, it's interesting under this election that broad coalition became like Liz Cheney and John Bolton and Barack Obama and George Bush. You see, we have a big wide net. We have to ask, how diverse really are these figures when it comes to questions of war and other questions that comfortable cradle conversations didn't usually touch, right? That kept it sort of, part of what was so successful about liberalism is we didn't really talk about liberalism in a way. We kind of accepted it as the norm, as this is how governance works. And so, obviously Trump winning, and the real significant thing that I saw the numbers I was looking at was that uncommitted voters would demonstrate and put their names on the list, which takes a lot considering what people go through with this particular issue, saying if you didn't do anything about ceasefire, we're not voting. And that number was significant, would have swayed the election in multiple swing states. So again, it's like, I remember talking to a friend of mine who I work with, and he used to be liberal. Years past, he voted for Obama. Obama was sort of an extension as well. And he was saying, I'm not sure how they can keep telling us that the moral thing to do is to vote for these people. I can see dead kids on my phone every day. How are you gonna how far you think this is gonna work? This is the rupturing of that moral authority in a very real way. Certainly not the most people in the country, but a significant amount to sway an election said, I'm not going to budge on this principle. As someone like Paul Robeson would say, I'm not going to budge a fraction of an inch from this principle until you actually decide to do something that's, this is not like, I'm not asking for a lot here. I'm asking that you stop a genocide. And you want to tell me you're open to anything but that most basic thing. And so, of course, it's a scary thing for a lot of people, because once that conversation that keeps things stable in a certain way is ruptured, now we're having a bunch of different conversations, then you can have a lot of different crazy things come up as well. And if you don't have faith in the people and you think they're all just pro-authoritarian or racist or backward, that makes it even more scary. But I think coming from a place of understanding that people at their fundamental level are intelligent, and they're making, as intelligent a decision they can make in that time, and that these aren't just racist Black people. This is similar to, slaves walking off the plantation when the planter class assumed they were going to stay there and work the fields during the war. But I guess I'm just adding on to it.
Yeah, I wanted to add a little bit to what Emil was just saying, but also more in general in response to what you guys were saying initially. Because I think clearly, to talk about liberalism and the future of this is very important, because we have seen over the last decade the world over that all throughout Asia and Europe, increasingly liberal regimes were giving way to something new that's not fully articulated yet, that doesn't fully capture what the people are at. But I think now, given this election in America, I think all of it, it's completely clear that how we have been sold this idea of liberal democracy for quite some time now. It's at a question. All of these articles, they're essentially trying to say, or they have to admit at this point, that liberalism and democracy are not compatible. And it's a deep thing to. It is deep to come to this point. And I guess what you were also saying initially about the whole idea of the kind of freedom that liberalism promises, which is what you guys talk about in your avant-garde essay, and figure out what the future of the the essence of liberalism is going to be, because that is, I think two things were very clarifying. Was one thing was that to see that there is essentially no difference between liberalism in its essential form and conservative. They're essentially the same thing. And I was immediately thinking about 100 years or so back. This is how, for instance, in India, whole different situation, whole different struggle. You had these two broad camps, which was the liberals or moderates on the one side and the radicals on the other. So that was how that's how it comes from, the idea of liberal. But the other thing was to see that people like Ross Douthat, for instance, comes from the conservative line of thought, who are really saying that liberalism as it stands has failed American people. And I was thinking that, essentially I agree with the fact that the principal contradiction of liberalism is ultimately whiteness, and how you see the world, how you see your role in the world. Also, it's a part of this question of what you have been saying of late, of the social epistemology, that how you know the world, it depends on where you find yourself. And I think what you were talking on with Garland also, that essentially, for the Black man, it is existential to know how the white man thinks. It's a question of your survival, and therefore how you know the world is not an academic question, and so on. Which is why I was thinking that this, how liberal thought, how liberal theory of freedom, and then liberal theory of pretty much, well, there's a reason we call it the liberal sciences in in the US. We don't, and I think it really comes from a way of knowing the world, which is ultimately, what we have been saying for a while, removed from the human condition, removed from the human being. And I think it really, we have to go back in some ways to the Nobel Prizes, because I think, everything that we were talking about the whole idea of the competent or intelligent governments, which Purva was mentioning, these are ideas which are ultimately sanctioned by the Nobel Prizes, and especially the Nobel Prize in economics. And economics and, these leading experts in theory, in economics and all over the sciences, the way they study the world, I think there is the basic point of divergence from what we are trying to see, what we have been studying, the black proletariat imaginary and an epistemology rooted in freedom. There is a basic divergence in that from from these liberal sciences and so on, in that they don't see their idea of the method with which they study the world is not dialectic. It's ultimately dogmatic, in the sense that they see their study of the world as independent of the outcome of the world, or at least that's the claim. Of course, of course, that's the facade, because, for instance, in the case of economics, it's the most ideological field, because the method it uses to study the world is directly put into practice. But I think what we are also trying to figure out, I was thinking about the question of epistemology that we are seeing, that you were talking about, is that yes, we are at a very new stage, not just in America, but in the world, where we have to figure out, people are trying to figure out how to know the world in a way that stands up to the democratic rule of the people, that is compatible with democracy. And I think, this question of epistemology, I think, is it's not separable from the question of liberalism, because Emil brought up King, and I was thinking of precisely Pilgrimage to Nonviolence, where he's working out through these political theories, political and economic theories, and so on, and moral theories and moral philosophers. And I think this is King's principle. This is why he says that he does hold certain tenets of liberalism very strongly. He talks about the openness to new ideas and so on. But I think he ultimately says that liberalism is dogmatic. It's dogmatic because it doesn't see the whole of the human condition. It sees how he talks about liberalism, sees classic liberalism, I guess. It sees the human being only in terms of the positive, the virtuous, and not the human capacity for evil and so on. And today you have the opposite tendency, where liberal theory and the way it's according to Fukuyama, the distortions, that is identity politics and so on, it ultimately rests on the fact that nobody can nobody can stand up for anything outside of their self-interest. So it's a complete focus on the negative of the human. And I think this is, I'm talking about this because I think this is something to be, we're trying to work out, that an epistemology that fits the time has to recognize that, it's something concrete, it's concrete because it comes from the concrete black poor, that how you understand the world actually affects the world. And I think the reason this is important now is because how we talk about Trump, and all of this question of whether or not how he's going to proceed, whether or not we're going to war with Iran, of course the FBI wants that, and so on, and whether or not how much clout do the neocons have with Trump. I think these are not. I think there's a tendency to think of it as though what the outcome of the Trump presidency is something outside of the hands of the people. And I think this is like precisely the ruling class liberal understanding that you can do your little thing, you can do your little protest and so on, but the outcome is something that's decided. Ultimately, it is a positivist understanding of the world, and I think what this has proved is. I mean, I do think that how we have been studying, how we have been talking about and studying the American people, and also talking about the movement that Trump represents, I think it has had a role. It has had a role in shaping the consciousness of how people see Trump now. I mean, it's no joke to say that, 8 years of propaganda has been irreparably damaged. It has been irreparably damaged, and I don't think it can simply be accounted for by talking about war or simply about how the Hispanic and the Hispanic and Black vote shifted alone. But it has to do with how people think. People are intelligent. People are thinking, and I think how we study, like going forward, how we study this moment, how we talk about Trump, how we study the American people now. I think it has a direct consequence on which way this country is going to go, which way Trump is going to go. Because I think this is like, I don't mean to say something too literal, but I think this is the conclusion that I'm forced to draw, that um, an epistemology that fits the time has to take into account that the method with which you study or observe the world, it does influence it. It does have consequences. So yeah.
I gotta get going. It's good to see you.
Okay, take care, man.
Just can I just add to what you're saying? Because I guess in like specific terms, part of it is like, okay, like why are people abandoning mainstream media? And it's because, like, obviously, yeah, the media lies, but it's because people instinctively and consciously want a different way to know the world, because the worldview that's being presented to essentially ordinary Americans, like all around this country, like basically at this point, hundreds of millions of people, like it's either I know they're lying to me, or I know that like they're not telling me everything, or it's like they're so wrapped up in their kind of bubble that they're not even able to see me or to see like what's really going on in the world. And I think that has been like, again, like my dad was like an example. He used to watch like CNN, he used to watch like all the mainstream outlets, and then it was like Trump happened, and it was like he was like, oh, like how come they're not like all of the media, all these experts, they got Trump phenomenon completely wrong. They couldn't see it at all. And it's like, okay, like, there must be something fundamentally wrong here. And so it's like that's a question where it's like epistemology becomes like an actual concrete thing of like, okay, like people are actually actively looking for different ways to know the world. I think like we're trying to make sense of that, but it's also like this question of like, because we brought up earlier, okay, what is the connection between like a working class white person in Butler, Pennsylvania, and like a Black person in North Philly? Obviously, it's a question of condition, but the question is, can they know each other?
Yes.
Can they know each other? And I think it's like,
The other thing, do they want to?
Do they want to know each other? But that's actually where, because we were when we were kind of preparing for the launch of this avant-garde issue, we were talking about like the Alfie interview and this question of like R&B and music. And in some ways, it's interesting because you could say even in places of this country that don't have that many Black people, the way that the consciousness of Black people can reach them is through music. Even if there aren't that many Black people, and that's universally true. And I think that's one of the like kind of under misunderstood or little understudied ways that actually it's like you don't like, yes, obviously like direct social contact, like actually seeing people and talking with people face to face is like the only way that you actually like build any sort of human relationship. But even beyond that, like it's like a lot of these Trump people, like I'm sure that they all have their own reasons for explaining like why all these like basically Black and Latino men are flocking to Trump. But it's like they don't really know. Like especially like all these white people, like they may have the theories, or like, for instance, I feel like a lot of the MAGA kind of commentators and like thought leaders will be like, oh, like it's because these like Black men and Latino men, they're red-blooded Americans like us, like they are just ordinary Americans, like they all believe in the American dream like we do. But it's like that's their theory of why people voted for Trump. But it's like, can you actually discover in real life, okay, like maybe there's something happening amongst the people, and especially happening amongst, like Black people in particular, which you don't understand yet, which you should try to understand. Because that's the whole reason why Trump got elected in the first place. And it's like, I think this question of, I feel like in many ways it's like, this election has put this question of like, okay, like Black people, like Latino, I don't know, like Latinos or like people, quote unquote, people of color. It's like, okay, like, they're not behaving in the way, because I feel like this is kind of like cynicism that I see sometimes amongst like Trump people. And it's like, oh, like Black people always vote for Democrats and they're brainwashed, and like you kind of adopt this kind of like basically racist view of Black people. But it's like, no, like actually the historic trend is that Black people are, if not moving to Trump, they're moving away from the Democratic Party. So it's like Black people are not what you think they are. So it's like, okay, that places on you a responsible, or at least some kind of curiosity to know, okay, like who are these people that I've been told all these things about, but like I actually don't know. And I think that's where the question would be like epistemology, because I feel like part of it is like we can't be satisfied with kind of just pure standpoint epistemology thing where your entire worldview is only determined by your social position. Because if that's the case, then it's like, that basically is just kind of like postmodernism, or like just a kind of relativity. You know, like everyone's view is basically determined by where they are in society. It's like, where then is truth? Like, where is there any possibility for unity? And it's like, yes, your knowledge of the world is influenced by like where you are in the world. And that's definitely true. But like, there still has to be, it's like you're saying, it's like people can still strive to know. And they can strive to know truth, and they can strive to know reality. And that's the basic thesis. That's also like going back to what Emily said at the beginning. It's like that's where free school sees itself. It's like the people can know, and they're not locked into their like basically their own social position over determining their entire worldview and their entire epistemology. Actually, there's a possibility for people to know reality, even if it goes against their class interests, or even against like their kind of what they perceive as like their social position or race position.
Well, I just wanted to say this once more, that I think there's a reason that we talk about. I mean, okay, when we talk about social epistemology, I don't think there's an equivalence between. I don't think there's an equivalence between the Black. I mean, you can't substitute, say, the Black proletariat imaginary with something else, with a brown, or whatever, even with India, Asia, and so on. And I think it comes from the fact that the Black struggle is a unique struggle because Black people were the only slaves who had to live with their master. And I think this is, and in terms of the social system, which is why I think it's really it's not an equivalence between, the comparison is not with, the question is not whether every people have their own epistemology of understanding the world, but what are the concrete conditions that required a fundamentally different epistemology for Black people in America. And this is, I think, what we've been, like you were also saying, is why what we come to, which is why the Black freedom struggle is indispensable, because this is a unique epistemology, to be found anywhere in the world. Just wanted to.
I think I look at what's going on in this country, and what I see taking place is that the epistemology of knowledge has changed because of social media. The constructs of the industrial media complex of perceptions and realities, which they were able to create an avatar that we all had to believe was true from our authoritative institutions, the church, the body politics, the college, changed. One of the primary drivers for change, they don't recognize sports. Okay. Joe Rogan became famous because he was in a fight. A huge, yeah, so there's a lot of black people who became successful in MMA. So now you had commoners who went into the gladiatorial ring for one purpose. There was no opportunity for where they were born. They were black, white, or Hispanic. And so you have a convergence of people who realize that they have now common interests. Okay? And now for the first time, you start to realize, because of COVID, because of lockdown, people had a chance to think and to ponder. You locked down working class people for 2.5 years. And that gave birth to social media, this new media in which the elites didn't control. So you had all this chattering going on. And they start to learn about each other. And they start to realize that we're all being bullshit. Okay? And so there's a renaissance taking place. And I think it's a renaissance. I think this is an awakening. They're not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. I think it's out permanently. And it's all they want. Because it can't continue for a lot of reasons. I follow a lot of military news that comes out of the military complex. America cannot go to war with Iran. It's been the military complex that has held the political class into another war. We no longer have the productive industrial capacity to wage war against Iran. Iran is a major power. Okay, it has industrial capacity, and it's created a sort of it has Russia, it has China, and it has those state powers backing, supporting the industrial base. And so a skirmish with Hezbollah, the skirmishes going in Gaza, that's one thing. But going to war with Iran, now we're talking about war. Because Russia and China cannot allow Iran to lose. Okay? So you'll have these little, you'll have the Lindsey Grahams and those come out. And I hear a lot of people from the military say, these guys have never been, they don't know what it is. And not only that, we're not even meeting our recruitment goals for the military.
Right.
You're way there. So you can't fight a war. You can kind of posture, you can kind of war. It's like if you watch these nature shows, you'll see a lion when he gets old. He wars more and fights less. And that's what America has to do. It has to war. Everybody knows that it can war, but it can't fight. Yes, you can, in other words, you're even talking about our military is built, like, for example, naval power. Naval power does not mean what it meant.
Right.
Because now these Navy ships, these large, they can put them with missile technology, they don't mean anything. So I think we're in a fascinating time. I think the Democratic Party doesn't have an answer. Not the answer that it's going to try to give. And the elites are out of touch. And I think we live in a fascinating time. And I think what happens, I think the biggest challenge also is that African Americans face a challenge, and that is to be a minority within a set of minorities. Because if you look at the geographical structure where America is, the majority of people of African descent of Hispanic origin, Central America, South America, the slave colonies were much larger than they were in the United States. Okay. Also the fact that as the migrants start to come to the United States, they're going to change the population. Okay. As Indians start to come and immigrate to this country, they're estimating by 2050, the Hispanic population will be well over 100 million. That dwarfs the African American population. and also the rise of the Asian population is coming here, we would end up becoming a silenced minority because, and this is not a put down, this is reality. People come to America for economic opportunity. They don't come here for political debate. They don't. That's just the reality. They come here to raise a family, make money, and America, enjoy the American dream. African Americans are going to become more and more isolated from other minority groups because they're not going to be able to keep pace. Okay? And that's a serious constraint in terms of how much influence that we're going to have in society. And also the fact, I think the ruling class was very clever. Since 1973, it's estimated that the African American family, and I use the word family intentionally, has aborted close to 30 million babies. That was strategic in their part because if they hadn't, they repackaged abortion. They rebranded it and called it family planning. They dumped women's rights. If you know about Sanger, Sanger was the one that founded this new women's movement. It came out of eugenics, which is about how you control unwanted populations, birth control, and the homosexualization of the male. And this is a written document. I'm not drafting this up. This is primary documentary evidence, okay, of how to control the Black population through the homosexualization of the Black male and abortion. Because if you look at the numbers, a buddy of mine who's an economist, African American, he said, you realize that if we had aborted those children, our population now in the United States would be 100 million. That had implications. Imagine if there were 100 million African Americans. That changed the political landscape, changed the economic landscape, it changed everything. So those numbers had to be reduced. And how do I go about doing it? And when Sanger came, I was reading a lot about eugenics. I can send you some primary material that was done by two very well-known Black sociologists. It was written that we have to impede the reproduction rate of the Black American. And we had to repackage it because she actually wrote that we can reduce the African American population through this mechanism that we ever could by having Klansmen come out at night in white robes. So this was planned, and they were very successful. The women's movement, in my opinion, was targeted toward the Black family to destroy it, and they were very successful. The Black man has been, not everybody, because you do have a bill, but they pretty much been castrated. That's why the Black church is empty of Black men. And the Black pastor was instrumental in making sure that was going to happen. With the Boule, with the so-called Black League, NAACP, all those groups, their purpose was to maintain the size of the herd population and to reduce it, either knowingly or unknowingly. I think it's a combination of both, because you can't be that stupid. I mean, I grew up in the Black church. I'm in the Black church, and I could see it. And I started talking to other Black men leaving the church, the Black church, and they were saying there's something wrong here. We go into the Black church, Black men are castrated. Unless you belong to that pastoral bubble. And they're very selective who they bring into that pastoral bubble. And that's, if you go to the Black church, you will not see well-educated Black men, successful Black men. The Black men that are in the Black church are primarily uneducated, unknowledgeable, and really don't know what time it is, because those Black men are not wanted, because that becomes a challenge to pastoral leadership. I seen it firsthand at the church I attended to. There were a number of black engineers, structural engineers, and they had graduated, and they actually went to talk to one of these pastors about an economic plan to mobilize black people. Like, for example, there were conversations came up. Why did the black church create their own construction unions? There was nothing illegal about it. Okay, never happened. Why didn't the black church encircle the economic wealth of the black community? Okay, so with so many questions raised until now, if you go to the internet, you have black men realizing that there was I don't like to use the word conspiracy because I don't believe in conspiracy, but there was an organized plan to have this outcome of the Great Society. You had Senator Moynihan wrote a very extensive paper, said that if this is enacted by the Democrats, okay, Johnson was a Democrat. Johnson was a racist. The Great Society was programmed to structure to destroy the black family. Okay, it's evident Moynihan was right. He said within 3 to 4 generations, you will make the family in the inner cities totally dysfunctional, and you will destroy the family. The black man was taken out of the family. You couldn't receive any kind of social benefits if the black man was in the house. So I think this is I think it's purposeful. I think there's been a backlash because the Joe Rogans of the world, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, for the first time, are having a conversation with black men. And they're starting to realize, whether you like Tucker, Tucker Carlson is, is a preppy kind of guy, but a lot of what he says, it makes you think. Okay? It makes you think. And he phrases it in such a way that everybody can understand. Joe Rogan is the same thing. You got this rapper, I can't think of his name. He's a comedian. What's his name? Cat
Williams.
Short guy.
Cat Williams?
Huh?
Cat Williams?
Cat Williams. Cat Williams on the Joe Rogan show. Biggest viewership ever. Okay, so now you have the elite seeing what they tried to keep apart for a long time. A friend of mine who's a labor lawyer, grew up in Mississippi, African American. He said the day that poor black people and poor white people, even though their experiences are different, realize what's been happening to them by the guy on the hill, game over. Because they don't have the population to restrain this movement. They don't. Okay, you have a handful of elites that run these universities, run these think tanks. They can't. So they're gonna have to sit down. And if Trump does this right, I think there's gonna be something called Trumpism. It's not Democrat, it's not Republican, it's not capitalism, it's not socialism. It's gonna be something different. And I don't think they can stop it. Because at the end of the day, the game was over. They just, listen, if anybody plays chess, you got any chess players here? Anybody raise your hand? Who plays chess? You play chess. If you're a chess player, you know 5 moves ahead that you lost. You're just hoping that he doesn't know that you lost. Am I right?
That's how it plays in.
China, the rise of China and Russia. When they froze, I told a friend of mine who's a banker, when they froze $1 billion of Russian capital, I said, that's the end of capitalism. Why? Because Russia is a nuclear superpower. A nuclear arsenal is more modern, more up to date than the United States, and a permanent member of the Security Council. You froze their money, that everybody in the world has to say, this is really gangster. This is real gangster. Okay? Who in the world would ever think that you would freeze, and it was illegal, you're going to freeze Russia's almost $500 billion? You're a nuclear superpower, and you're a permanent member of the Security Council. So what does that say to China? What does it say to India? I don't care how India tries to play its hand. India's not stupid. What does it say to everybody? It says we have to organize, and now you have reps. That is going to change the domestic internal politics of the United States. It has to or will survive. That's, I don't even, I just want
Yeah.
you know, some crazy, right? I've
No,
been
no, you ain't
I've been
crazy,
crazy a long
man. You
time.
got a
man.
lot of good
I've
sense,
been crazy
man.
a long time, man. That's what became friends. Became crazy.
Yeah, man.
Used to walk
That's
down
all
the
I
street,
get
right?
with is crazy people, man. Because I'm a little fold
Yeah.
myself.
Hey, listen, how can you be not feel black in America?
Well, so let's see if we have some chats and then we can.
Okay, we have a lot of like short comments, from the time. Ralph J. Monroe who says, me and my other peers have been disengaged from the Democratic Party for almost 10 years now. We grew up seeing how our parents and grandparents were loyal to that party, but we're tired. The pandering and parading of celebrities is demeaning. Overall, we're tired of both parties and want something different. And then Bumble 7 agreed, says, I too traditionally rooted for the Democratic Party. I'm smarter now. A lot of people gave you applause emojis for your introduction, said a grand pleasure to hear you lecture, and also say a beautiful introduction, and then also congratulations to the preschool for the Chicago event and Minister Ishmael at House Marion. And Todd says, long live the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, a true American hero.
Long live what?
The Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan.
That talk.
A true American hero.
Okay.
And then Spark said that they really enjoyed your conversation on the Garland Nixon show. It was so good, I had to watch it twice. And Todd said, yeah, it's so great to see you back on the Garland Nixon show after an uncomfortably long in between. And then Jahan had some comments and he said, this has been an amazing week following a beautiful Chicago event with the preschool. I just wanted to add that I definitely agree that the universities are going to be the major opposition force to the Trump movement and government. Unlike other sectors of society which have shifted since 2016, academia is still dominated by extreme anti-Trump ideology. The irony is that these academics are supposed to provide knowledge production and analysis about what's happening in society, but they're so divorced from the people and they're hysterical that they can't give a sober analysis. Nonetheless, they're going to play a role of ideological disruption against populism. I think that the populist movement is going to need to construct a counter-academia, some sort of set of counter-intellectuals to produce an ideological consolidation against neoliberalism and the deep state, and that the preschool is definitely a major force in this mix. And then he also said it's interesting that exit polls showed that voters rated democracy as their biggest issue of concern. However, the media totally misread this as voters buying the Democrat view that Trump was the greatest threat to democracy, when actually it was true. And so it indicates that the free school's focus on the struggle for democracy is a lot closer to the way that the people are thinking. And then let's see. Kansas Mama said 3 hours. I guess I missed a lot, but that she thinks that the election was about policies and transparency. Kamala was not transparent and she was very divisive. Whereas Trump has been exactly the same since the 70s and 80s. In the 90s and 2000s, he was loved and popular. He isn't evil, he's a man not loved. And that the propaganda needs to be addressed. It's not okay for our news sources to be spreading lies about a president or presidential candidate, and not just lying, but censoring. And not to mention all the elite celebrities backing Kamala were in some way or another connected to P. Diddy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true. And then there's some discussion in the comments about Trump being a Zionist or like a greater evil. And then Kansas Mama says, I disagree, Trump is just anti-war. But then says, I'm proud to have voted against the socialist left and for the capitalist. So yeah, some discussion about what communism is or isn't. But then she says, personally, I would have elected Tulsi Gabbard. I like her a lot. But I do believe that Trump is going into office this time with a stand-up team that wants what's best for America. And yeah, the discussion is continuing onwards about communism. And then lastly, Todd says, all things considered, we have to admit that China lifting almost 1 billion people out of poverty was freeing. But yeah, that was it.
Well, that was a great preschool. So we're gonna end now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah.
We're not like the biggest, but just as you already mentioned, we launched online the 3rd issue of Avant Garde.
Yay.
publishing, so it's on avantjournal.com, and then we're also planning to publish a print version as well. I think hopefully before Thanksgiving holidays, but as you may guess, we were preparing this before the election, but we really wanted it to be something that speaks to the struggle that has to take place after this election and moving forward for the American people. So, yeah. That's all.